Thank you and kindly be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, today's seminar session aims to present country progress in implementing INFFs, the opportunities for SDG-aligned investment and the role of blended finance, as well as to facilitate exchanges of knowledge, experience, and good practice in the implementation of INFF. We will also discussing regarding investment opportunities and ways to mobilize additional finance to target the right sectors and identify policy recommendations or further action for the G20 in supporting countries to establish resilient holistic financing strategy. Distinguished guests, all speakers, participants, ladies and gentlemen, today's event will commence with opening remarks from Deputy Minister for Maritime and Natural Resources, Ministry of National Development Planning, Bappenas, who will be represented by Mrs. Vivi Yulaswati, Head of SDGs Secretariat, Bappenas. Please welcome.
His Excellency Minister Suharto Mono Arfa, Minister of National Development Planning, Head of National Development Planning Agencies, Bappenas, Her Excellency Kani Wikna Raja, United Nations Assistant Secretary General and UNDP Regional Director for Asia Pacific, distinguished G20 delegates, distinguished panelists and speakers, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, selamat pagi, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, Salam, Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, Salam Kebajikan. I'm standing here to represent the Deputy of Maritime Affairs and Natural Resources who cannot join us because his mother passed away yesterday. It is utmost pleasure to join you today at the G20 Development Working Group side event, where the Minister of National Development Planning, Head of National Development Planning, will launch the Indonesian Integrated National Financing Framework, or INFF. I would like to firstly extend my appreciation to the UNDP for their support in developing the assessment. Distinguished panelists and participants, in the spirit of Indonesia G20 presidency in 2020, Indonesia continues to push further the agenda on the financing for sustainable development. We continue our strong collaborations with UNDP to provide the stock take updates on the INFF. The process for the formulation of the report that will be launched today was conducted with the SDGs principles of inclusivity and leaving no one behind. Related stakeholders were involved and included in every step of the process. Several consultative and thematic dialogues were conducted to ensure that all stakeholders shared their experience and expertise to be input in the INFF Indonesia report. The INFF consultative dialogue was conducted to map the landscape for financing sustainable development and obtain general inputs on the report from ministries, agencies, private sectors, and international development partners. The following rounds of thematic dialogues were held to obtain detailed information of each sector. Our commitment in INFF implementations is in line with our efforts in advancing innovative and sustainable finance. Indonesia has recently issued Green Sukuk and SDGs bond as part of the example innovative finance. We also have launched the SDG Investor Map to showcase viable SDG-focused projects. Ladies and gentlemen, lastly, addressing financing opportunity in the SDGs requires considerations of several factors that must be emphasized. Many innovative sustainable finance initiatives in Indonesia are ongoing and encouraged. In the midst of the uncertainty because of the COVID pandemic and other shocks, it is becoming increasingly important to address and close the gap the SDG implementation using the INFF framework. We still have many remaining tasks for sure to address in implementation of the INFF. I hope in this event we can kickstart a concrete ideas for financing of the sustainable development and come up with the policy recommendations in establishing resilience and holistic financing strategy. I'm hopefully that we can build a shared vision to support the acceleration of the SDGs implementation, not only to close the gap on financing, but also to recover stronger and together for a better world. I thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Om Santi Santi Om.
Thank you very much, the Honorable Mrs. Vivi Yulaswati, Head of SDGs Secretariat Bappenas, for delivering us here the opening remarks. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, with a great pleasure, I want to inform that UN Assistant Secretary General and UNDP Regional Director for Asia and the Pacific, Mrs. Kani Wignaraja, virtually joining today's event. Now, I would like to request Her Excellency Mrs. Kani Wignaraja to deliver her opening remarks.
Excellency Suharto Mono Arfa, the Minister of National Development Planning, Excellencies, partners, esteemed guests, good morning, selamat pagi. Thank you so much to the Government of Indonesia for inviting me to open this side event of the third G20 Development Working Group meeting and be part of the launch of the very special Indonesia INFF. Indonesia certainly holds a very special place in my life as I spent some time working in Indonesia during early years with UNDP. And those were unforgettable times with much experiences learned and some of that coming through even now during debates and conversations held at that time. So I wish to recognize the pioneering role of Indonesia in sustainable finance and the leadership it has brought to these issues in the context of the G20. Looking at our global context today, it is no surprise to anyone, online and in the room, that we are certainly experiencing unprecedented setbacks on the SDGs and on climate action. The COVID-19 pandemic has widened the SDG financing gap by a staggering 50%. It is now estimated at approximately $3.7 trillion for developing countries annually to meet this bill. At the same time, we have witnessed more compounding crises. To illustrate, approximately over 2 billion people, or 30% of the world's total population, is currently exposed to deadly heat waves just in the last 20 to 30 days. And this is without talking about the ongoing war in Ukraine, which has also caused a massive global disruption, with over 70 million people expected to fall into poverty, given the food and energy crisis of unprecedented proportions that it has resulted in. And who is paying the price for this? It is once again on the shoulders of the world's poorest nations, and within that, on the most vulnerable and poorest households. 58% of the world's poorest countries are currently in or near debt distress. We see this every day in the news. Several countries such as Sri Lanka and Lebanon have already declared bankruptcies. For Sri Lanka, this is the first time since its independence. National budgets are just not keeping up with food and fuel bills. And to put it in more people-centric terms, this is now a cost of living crisis for everyone. Low-income countries would need to spend an additional $750 billion just to bridge their social protection gap. and this is funding they often don't have. Now, these sobering facts call on all of us for more urgent action. We must get global and national financing and financing systems working right to resolve the food, energy, and climate crisis and see progress on the SDGs. The question we must ask is it a matter of the lack of money, or where that money is, and if it is flowing effectively to where it is needed most? I think most of you would say the money is there. It just has to be put towards these SDGs. Now, from a domestic financial market point of view, countries must ensure that national financing policies and planning are aligned with sustainable development and climate change goals. This is a minimum requirement if we are to know where that money is, how much is needed, and how it needs to flow. Now, this is where the INFFs aim to provide a transparent planning and delivery tool. Since INFFs were introduced in Addis Ababa in 2015, at least 80 countries around the world are now using them. I am pleased to note that Indonesia is among the leaders in this regard. Now, getting an INFF in place is no easy feat. To support this effort, UNDP, along with OECD, UNDESA, Italy, and the EU, launched a INFF facility last year. It is this facility that provides countries with technical assistance to calibrate their financing policies with their sustainable development ambitions and targets. And believe me, this facility has been kept busy. Countries have proposed over 250 reforms to public and private financing policies. New financing instruments are being tested, and many nations are incorporating SDG and gender responsive budgeting and the mobilization of SDG impact investment into their national financing strategies for the first time. We are also finding that INFFs provide a strong push with evidence to address growing inequality gaps, often ignored before. First, by improving data and transparency that shines a light on where money has not flowed to. And second, by prioritizing and directing national spending in vital areas such as education, health, and rural basic infrastructure that directly addresses these inequalities. It is hardly surprising that Indonesia has been a pioneer on the INFF. The country is at the forefront of mobilizing new and innovative financing for the SDGs. As was mentioned in the opening remarks, in 2018, Indonesia was the first country to issue a sovereign green sukuk. Now, maybe to some people's surprise, it's in its third issuance and has raised over 5.8 billion US dollars. Indonesia has also generated over $500 million in new financing last year with its first SDG bond. With these thematic bonds, the country has demonstrated how both private and public investment can and must be brought together in the pursuit of low emission pathways to development.
Ibu Rati di kantor apa enggak ya?
It is certainly setting a new model for development.
Ini ya, minta tolong untuk.
Now, the key here is deepening maturity of the domestic financial markets, which is a prerequisite to get this right. So building these capabilities and regulations remain key. And this is where UNDP will be supporting the government of Indonesia as well. Now, financing has flowed to Indonesia also due to leadership commitment, capabilities of state and non-state institutions, and the resilience of communities who have shown a determined drive to rebound and recover in more sustainable ways. UNDP will continue to work alongside government to develop these innovative financing instruments, as well as to deepen the capacities of national and local institutions involved to manage and deliver on development. This is part of a larger worldwide effort to formulate game-changing sustainable financing behind refreshed development policies and programs. Let us hope that with the success of this INFF, which is only the starting point on this path to state of progress, that development models will be defined differently. We look forward to our work with all governments and partners of the G20, our UN, key stakeholders, and other partners to unlock more financing solutions for the SDGs. So I hope the DWG dialogues will open more space for these very necessary conversations and negotiations. I thank you all. Terima kasih.
Thank you very much for Her Excellency Mrs. Kani Wignaraja for giving your best time to deliver the opening remarks this morning. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, now we would like to honorably invite the Minister of National Development Planning, Head of Bappenas, His Excellency Mr. Suharso Monoarfa, to deliver his keynote speech and followed by the launch of INFF.
Her Excellency Kani Wignaraja, United Nations Assistant Secretary General and UNDP Regional Director for Asia and the Pacific, distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. The world is facing various crises that are threatening the survival of mankind. COVID-19 pandemic has presented major challenges in almost every aspect of our life. Climate change has also been increasingly threatening humans around the world. Achieving the Sustainable Development Goals will therefore be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. If we do not push hard enough to ensure its achievement, we will experience disastrous consequences in the near future. The COVID-19 pandemic not only reversed progress towards SDGs but also reduced available resources of developing financing. Pre-COVID-19, the annual global SDG financing gap was 2.5 trillion, but it widened to 4.2 trillion US dollar due to the pandemic. In Indonesia, the number is estimated to be 1 trillion US dollar in order to achieve SDGs in 2030. And with the impact of pandemic, it obviously increases significantly. Current circumstances have put financing for sustainable development at risk of collapse, whereas it is needed now more than ever. COVID-19 has erased years of development progress and caused major setback to all sources of finance. Nevertheless, the President of the Republic of Indonesia has reiterated that despite the pandemic, SDGs targets must remain intact. More resources are therefore needed to close the existing financing gap, which has now been wider due to the pandemic. Substantial financing is required to respond to today's sustainable development challenges. The need for a holistic, integrated approach to financing recovery and medium to longer term is greater now than ever. In line with the spirit of encouraging a holistic financing strategy, the government is pleased to be the first pioneer of INFF in 2019, ensuring our commitment to devise a holistic approach. We are happy to learn that currently 86 countries have applied for INFF, both developing and developed ones. Indonesia has designed an economic transformation to build sustainable future with the SDGs as the main framework. Indonesia also has already taken steps towards developing sustainable financing strategies by policy, drawing on tools and frameworks. We have created a sustainable ecosystem by producing a sustainable finance roadmap, green economy, SDG as investor mapping Indonesia Impact Fund, ESG Stock Market Index, and mainstreaming SDGs to state-owned enterprises and investment policy. INFF facilitates a structured dialogue between ministries, agencies, and non-state actors to map the landscape for sustainable development financing. The outcome of the dialogue helped inform the full range of financing sources of both public and private finance as the basis to develop a strategy to increase investment and manage risk. The INFF has shown promising potential, ranging from identifying new and innovative instruments to leverage, such as blended finance and impact investing, to aligning philanthropy and faith-based financing with SDGs. The good news is we have the tools and resources, but the challenges lies on bringing together all stakeholders to align their business process with SDGs and eventually delivering the resources to sectors that need it the most. We envision INFF to support planning and financing of Indonesia's national priorities, bringing the $1 trillion needed to resolve the financing gap until 2030. To this end, I would like to emphasize that time is of the essence. We are just 8 years away from 2030. Therefore, the key role of the INFF is to be an umbrella to coverage all financing initiatives towards achievement of the SDGs agenda on time. Hence, it cannot be timeline to launch this INFF report, which has helped us reassess our development priorities and financing strategy needed to deliver them. To conclude, the determining phase of the INFF lies on its implementation, putting emphasis on the importance of governance and coordination. Therefore, I do hope this dialogue can provide an avenue to strengthen multi-stakeholder engagement to help piece together the work we undertake and scale them for greater impact. I would like to firstly extend my appreciation to the UNDP for their support in developing the assessment. I would also like to thank government colleagues and development partners who are traveled all the way to Bali. I do hope this marks hopeful milestone to our strong collaboration in organizing INFF. With this, I launched the INFF Indonesia. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please give big round of applause for the launch of INFF Indonesia. Also thank you, His Excellency Mr. Suharto Mono Arfa as our keynote speaker in this lovely morning. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we have seen together the opening of the G20 Development Working Group Seminar, INFF Sustainable Investment. Once again, please allow me to express my sincere gratitude to Mr. Suharto Mono Arfa, Mrs. Kani Wignaraja, Mrs. Vivi Yulaswati, who have joined us in this auspicious moment. We kindly request all participants who are joining us virtually or on site here to please join our panel discussion. On the first session regarding INFF as a strategic umbrella to orchestrate SDGs financing, and the second session regarding the INFF operationalization. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, before we proceed to the side event first topic of the panel discussion, allow me to introduce our distinguished moderator, Valerina Daniel. She is a prominent journalist with more than 19 years of experience, a beauty pageant of Miss Jakarta in 1999, Miss Indonesia and ASEAN in 2005, also a former advisor to the Indonesian Minister of Tourism for Sustainable Tourism Development. She is currently also helping the Australia-Indonesia Center to focus on communications and women's leadership. She has published many environmental books to promote the issues of conservation, climate change, and sustainable living. An environment ambassador, communication advisor, and spokesperson for the timber legality assurance system from 2015 until 2018. And now I would like to give the floor, please give applause for our distinguished moderator, Valerina Daniel, to lead the panel discussion of the first topic station. The time is yours.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, MC, for that kind introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Peace be upon us. Salam sejahtera untuk kita semua. Om Swastiastu. Namo Buddhaya, salam kebajikan. Shalom. Good morning, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the G20 Third Development Working Group Side Event, Integrated National Financing Framework. My name is Valerina Daniel, and it is a pleasure to be your moderator today. Now we are entering panel 1, INFF as a strategic umbrella to orchestrate SDGs financing. And as stated by the Minister Suharto Mono Arfa in his remarks, today's event is important because we are not only going to talk about Indonesia, but we will also learn from other countries' experience in implementing INFF, especially during this pandemic recovery, conflict, climate change, and the global rising prices. And therefore, in the first part of the panel, we will hear from the experience at the country level in developing an INFF. Firstly, as Indonesia launches its INFF report, we will hear from Mrs. Vivi Yulaswati, Senior Advisor to Minister of National Development Planning at Bappenas, and Mr. Denny Ridwan, Director of Government Debt Securities, Ministry of Finance. And then we will hear the experience in Nigeria, presented by Ms. Nabila Aguele, Special Advisor to the Honorable Minister of Finance, Budget, and National Planning of Nigeria. And these are two of the 86 countries developing an INFF. Next, we have Mr. Tim Strawson, SDG Finance Specialist at UNDP. He will present the emerging findings of the INFF Sustainable Investment Stock Take, commissioned by the Indonesian G20 presidency for the DWG. In the final part of the panel, we will turn to the role of the G20 and international actors in responding to the financing priorities being articulated by countries through their INFF. In that part, we are going to have Mr. Guillaume Baro, economist, delegation of European Union to Indonesia and Brunei Darussalam, mission to ASEAN. He will share reflection from the EU in their support to country-led INFF. And Mr. Paul Horrocks will close out the panel, sharing views from the OECD on the opportunity of INFF and the role of the INFF facility as a vehicle to take forward the G20 frameworks. So without further ado, please welcome our speakers on stage and online. Thank you, speakers, for joining us today. So before we start, I would like to inform you that each speaker will have 10 minutes to present their views on the podium, or you may also stay on your chairs. So to kick us off, Ms. Fifi will now discuss the result of the INFF report in Indonesia, the first step in the Indonesian government's process of developing the INFF. So, Ibu Fifi, could you tell us how you see the INFF becoming an umbrella for various financing policies and instruments that can strengthen financing for Indonesia's Sustainable Development Plan and the SDGs? Because we know 2030 is approaching soon.
Thank you very much for the question. To follow up the ones that you've maybe heard from previous remarks, I just like to add some more rationale why Indonesia need the INFF. First, even before the COVID pandemic, the needs for SDG financing is already huge. According to the Indonesian roadmap toward 2030, the needs for high scenario, it costs around 4.75 trillion US dollar. And among them, including for achieving only the goal 13, which is we have to put more attention now because the climate change is also already huge. According to the NDC of Indonesia, it needs around 322 billion US dollar. And after the COVID, we haven't a measure for Indonesia, but globally there is an increasing around quite huge. It's around 70% above. So that's the first reason why Indonesia needs the INFF. The second reason, there are many things that we have done actually in Indonesia. The government somehow developing the context in the midterm development plan, in which around 124 out of 169 targets of the SDGs have been mainstreamed in the national development plan. It means annually it's been elaborated through the projects as well as the funding by the sectors as well as the regions. However, the gaps, according to the roadmap, it's account to up until 1 trillion US dollar for the high scenario. That's why orchestrating all the efforts, all the sources is another reasons that we really need to have a framework for orchestration of the resources. So that's why the INFF provide a framework how to orchestrate beautifully, recognizing all the potential we have, and doing a division of labor. We in a planning ministry, and also Pak Denny in Ministry of Finance, and of course with the private entity and international partners. So again, INFF provide us with umbrella of not only collaborations, but also creating more impact in order to achieve the SDGs on time. Next slide, please. This is the result of the landscaping or stock take for financial instrument and also the stakeholders. Like I mentioned earlier, that besides the domestic public finance, there have been significant domestic private finance as well as at the international forums, both from the public and privates. But in many cases, they work still in silos for different objectives and also mechanism. So next slide, please. The government of Indonesia has developed a consecutive or a sequencing strategy in INFF to provide a beautiful song and more systematic way in order to achieve the SDGs. There are a couple of strategies that we could see in the report, starting for developing a green banking solution for sustainable investment, accelerate the capital markets, deepening to unlock financing opportunities, fiscal policy reform for sure. Maybe Pak Denny will tell more about that. Align the philanthropy and faith-based financing, improve impact investment mobilization. The blended finance, we have here Pak Tantowi Yahya, Excellence Ambassador of Indonesia in New Zealand. We'll talk more on our effort for the blended finance. Also improve incentive for regional SDGs adoption up until the establishing the ones that we are still working on for the blue finance. Next slide, please. So it will complete our effort that already done, including sustainable financing roadmap, the green taxonomy. The OJK, the Financial Service Authority, already issues the green taxonomy, which guide private entity to also move toward sustainable finance. And even the IDX issues the IDX ESG Leaders Index, and of course the SDGs bonds and sukuk, as well as the investor map and standards of the sustainable development like ISO, IEC. That's all the ones that already existed, will be complement with other efforts and strategy that provided by the INFF. So finally, the integrated financing solutions through the INFF provide a framework for collaborations and leveraging the impact. Of course, three focus in short period: improve the blended finance mechanism to attract more private finance, improve investment mobilizations, and also align the philanthropy and the faith-based financing with the SDGs effort. Maybe that's all for the time being. Thank you.
Thank you, Ibu Fifi. So now, ladies and gentlemen, we know that the INFF is designed to connect national sustainable development plans with financing, as Ibu Fifi already presented to us just now. So to give us more view from the Ministry of Finance, we have joined here by Mr. Denny Ridwan. So, Pak Denny, what opportunities do you see to unlock private capital for sustainable development? And what is the role of blended finance and other policy tools and instruments that the Ministry of Finance are using?
Okay, thank you, Moderator. I think, as mentioned by Ibu Fifi, that as part of a global community, Indonesia has commitment to achieve the Sustainable Development Goal by 2030, and the finance become the key driver to achieve these goals. And also mentioned by Pak Ministers earlier that the COVID-19 has forced countries worldwide to reallocate their financial resources to address the crisis. And as from Minister of Finance, we need to expand our fiscal space to ensure the smooth transitions toward green and inclusive growth. Therefore, I think the integrated national financing frameworks play important roles to ensure the sufficiency of funds and given that the reliance on public fund is not sufficient. So, from the Ministry of Finance perspective, you know that there are three major functions of state budgets: the allocation, distributions, and stabilizations. So therefore, in order to support the sustainable finance, we need to translate these three functions into revenue, spendings, and also financings. On the revenue side, the objectives aim is to encourage the developments of sustainable, to support the renewable energies and environmentally friendly business sectors. For example, we provide tax incentive to support the development of geothermals and others renewables energy projects. On the expenditure side, the main theme here is spending better, meaning that the government spending policies are directed to encourage low carbons and government's, the climate resilience projects. For example, in order to monitor the expenditures since 2018, the government with support from the UNDP, we implement and develop the climate budget tagging or CBT. So the CBT is implemented at the national level and also at the local level. This is to make sure that we need to determine how much the contributions of state budgets and local government budget to climate change management. On the financing side, the budget financing policy is intended to support expansionary fiscal policy that we have just mentioned earlier. So to ensure that fiscal sustainability, the fiscal sustainability, the Ministry of Finance developed the innovative financings, including the blended financings. For example, in this case, we already have the public-private partnerships, the SDG mission ones, and also issuance of government securities in the ESG bonds, such as Green Sukuk and SDG. So let me discuss in detail. First, on the next slide, the journey of sustainable finance instruments has been started in 2018 when we published the Green Bonds and Green Sukuk frameworks in January 2018, followed by the issuance on March. So this framework has developed to demonstrate our intentions to issue green bonds or green sukuk in the aim to finance or to refinance the green eligible projects. So based on these frameworks, the government of Indonesia has mobilized around $5 million to finance green projects. And furthermore, in 2019, we also issued the first retail green sukuk in domestic market. And so far, we have collected around 11.8 trillion rupiah. So Indonesia has been recognized as the first sovereign country who issue green sukuks and the world's first retail sovereign green sukuk. Building on the successful of green sukuk issuance, the government of Indonesia and also with the Bappenas, we're exploring other alternative of innovative financings. So in 2021, we mutual finance with the Ministry of National Planning and also coordinating Ministry of Maritime and Investment Affairs, we expanded the existing green frameworks to become the SDGs government securities frameworks. So this new framework is a more comprehensive framework, cover various aspects, including green, social, even blue aspects. So these frameworks consist of four elements about how we will use the proceeds, how we select the projects, and also how we will report the impact report that we will issue annually. So following the success of green sukuk issuance in September 2021, we have issued the first SDG bonds, a tenor 12 years, and the size is 500 billion euro. This is the important milestone for us as the first Asian country who issue SDG euro bonds. And the other initiative is on the SDG emission ones. The next slide. So SD Indonesia One is blended finance platform managed by PT Sarana Multi Infrastructure, PT SMI. This is the state-owned enterprise under the Ministry of Finance. The platform is developed to finance SDG from various sources, like Ibu Vivi mentioned, from philanthropies, international donors, climate finance institutions, green investors, commercial banks, and also from the multilateral development banks. So, as you know, that like any other emerging countries, we are facing a couple of challenges in this area. First, we have the lack of capacity and resources from the private sectors in order to budgeting, planning, and also preparation of the projects. Also, we have the lack of project readiness due to the inadequate process preparations and also other setback caused by tariff policy, unsustainable business model, and high interest rates. So this platform offers various blended finance solutions. For example, consultations and project development service to improve project qualities and readiness, the use of various source of fund from various stakeholders, and also enhance synergy and collaborative with the fund stakeholders and strategic partners. So far, the SDG Indonesia One has secured funding around $3.3 billion from 33 partners. On the last slide about the PPP, the arrangement between public funding and private financing for infrastructure projects. In this case, you know that PPP projects also apply ESG principles. This PPP developed around 4 pillars. The first pillar is about the regulatory frameworks. We have issued the Presidential Regulations number 38, 2015 as the overarching frameworks, and followed by the issuance of implementing regulation from related ministries, including Bappenas and also Ministry of Finance. On the second pillars, various fiscal government support also have been provided. For example, the project development facilities, the project preparation facilities, availability gap funding, and also government guarantee. And the third pillars on the institutional arrangements, the government has established the PPP unit under Ministry of Finance, complemented by the establishment of joint office with other ministries as platform collaborations and also hub with private sectors. And to accelerate the executions of the projects, the government has also established special mission vehicle or SMV, among others like the Indonesian Infrastructure Guarantee Fund for managing government guarantee, PT SMI, as I mentioned before, the Indonesian Infrastructure Finance for financing project, and also State Asset Management Agency or ELMAN for providing land clearing fund. So currently, PPP is workable and proven scheme. At least Indonesia has 50 projects in the pipeline with 29 projects already signed. So the total project value is around 16.9 billion US dollar. I will send you back to you, PV.
Okay, thank you, Pak Denny, for that explanation. So, ladies and gentlemen, there has been much discussion in the DWG over the last couple of years about INFF, and then it is fantastic to be able to hear from Pak Denny and Bu Vivi about the ongoing progress that the current presidency is making. So, you may welcome to give applause to this project. Okay, so of course we already know, as I mentioned before, that not only Indonesia who have already implemented INFF, and then we already know also that there are 86 countries in total who are already implemented that scheme. And so to give us insights from one of the countries which is most advanced in its INFF process, we turn now to Ms. Nabila Aguele, who joined us from Nigeria via online connection. Ms. Nabila, can you hear us clearly?
Yes, I can. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us today. So, Ms. Nabila, tell us about Nigeria's experience in adopting the INFF approach. What are the benefits that you, as a policymaker in the Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning, are seeing and hopeful for in the future?
Thank you very much. Let me first begin by saying good morning to all the participants, distinguished guests, distinguished members of government in Indonesia, and also to say congratulations on this amazing milestone today. It is an honor to be here to share Nigeria's journey in the INFF process. So before speaking about where we are with respect to the INFF, I'd like to start by providing a bit of a context as to Nigeria's journey with respect to the SDGs. So even before COVID, even before we committed to joining the INFF process in December 2019, we've had a strong commitment to ensuring sustainable and inclusive growth and achieving the SDGs. Core aspects of our SDG strategy have included early domestication and mainstreaming across the federal and state governments, as well as interagency coordination. So the ministry that I belong to works very closely with our Office of the Senior Special Assistant to the President on the SDGs to ensure that the SDGs are mainstreamed both across our national plans, but as well as at the subnational level. Government ownership is a key feature of our SDG process, along with strong public policies, and we've also really benefited from peer review and engagement, and participated in 2 national voluntary reviews at the UN High-Level Political Forum in 2017 and 2020. Even with that, our pre-COVID estimated financing gap for the SDGs was $100 billion over the next 10 years, and this was pre-COVID. Like other countries, and like has been mentioned by all of the speakers so far, we are in unprecedented times because of the COVID-19 pandemic, the crude oil price issues, as well as the war in Ukraine, and of course, the climate change issues that we're facing. And are seeing, especially in the last month or so. So financing and achieving the SDGs has become an issue globally. In terms of our SDG journey, we decided in 2019, pre-COVID actually, to join the INFF. And that decision, in a lot of ways, has really informed the accelerated process that our INFF experience has had in Nigeria. So I'll start first with our institutional structure for the INFF in Nigeria. We have a high-level steering committee that's chaired by my minister, the Honorable Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning. And I will note that as of this current tenure of our presidency, he's serving the second of 2 terms, he decided to combine what was initially the Ministry of Finance with the Ministry of Budget and National Planning to ensure better coordination overall across our public financial management and fiscal policy space. And this is a structure that we've benefited from, because we have both the Senior Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, who chairs the high-level steerco, but we also have the Minister of State, Budget and Planning as a member, along with other key government stakeholders, the central bank, the Nigeria Governors Forum to ensure state-level participation and ownership, our budget office, and of course, the Office of the Senior Special Assistant to the President on the SDGs. Another feature of our INFF process is that we really believe that it's important for our partners, both development partners and the private sector, to have what I'd like to call a seat at the table. So as you'll see from our structure, it includes our strong partners, the UN system, of course, UNDP, from whom we've received a lot of support, and of course the European Union, from whom we've also received a lot of support at the national level, as well as other key development partners, including the World Bank, the Africa Development Bank, the IMF, and the Islamic Development Bank. And we also have the private sector advisory group on the SDGs well represented. So this institutional structure represents a multi-stakeholder high-level steering committee, which is supported by a core working group at the technical level, of which I'm a member. Our Office of the Senior Special Assistant to the President on the SDGs serves as the Secretariat for the INFF. And really what it has allowed is for us to really benefit from those institutional relationships and the work that the Office of the SDGs has done with respect to mainstreaming and implementing the SDGs at the national and subnational level. Next slide, please. So as I said earlier, we signed on to the INFF in December 2019 and began our INFF process in earnest in March of 2020, owing to understandable delays as we tried to grapple and ensure a smooth recovery post-COVID and to address the economic and health implications of the COVID pandemic. Our INFF process, we developed a development finance assessment over the course of 2021 and finalized that. And that DFA very much informed the financing strategy, which is what we're working on currently. We have a draft that is a reflection of multiple stakeholder engagements, both at the federal and state level, a mix of one-on-one engagements as well as small groups, and ensuring that we're harvesting inputs from all the critical stakeholders. So we have our INFS document, which is currently being finalized, and what we agreed to do, recognizing the unique circumstances that we're facing post-COVID, is to also develop our MTEF, our medium-term expenditure framework, our M&E frameworks, our medium-term revenue strategy, and our coordination frameworks alongside the financing strategy in order to ensure an accelerated process towards implementation. Next slide, please. So focusing specifically on our integrated national financing strategy, as I said earlier, we had the benefit of having developed a development financing assessment as we were recovering and experiencing the COVID pandemic. And that very much informed the development of the financing strategy, which took into account the constrained fiscal space, challenges with domestic revenue, and the exacerbation owing to COVID. So our financing strategy is organized along 4 strategic themes. Looking on the left-hand side, we have our domestic public finance and domestic private finance interventions. So on the domestic public finance side, we're looking at improving domestic public financing by first and foremost enhancing our federal revenue base, enhancing state revenue base. This is taking into account the fact that part of our challenge with domestic revenue mobilization has to do with ensuring that we improve our revenue base and bring more people into the revenue bracket, the taxable bracket. In addition, we're working to continue improving coordination of our budgeting processes, in introducing additional innovations in debt management, catalyzing our government-owned entities, as well as continuing to focus on capturing illicit financial flows. On the domestic private finance side, we're looking at continuing to enable our business environment. There's a presidential enabling business council, which has been working very arduously to improve our ease of doing business rankings and the business practices in the country. We're also continuing to scale up sustainable finance and increasing local and other institutional investors. At the international level, we're looking at public finance as well as private finance. With respect to public finance, we're working to mobilize, the recommendations include mobilizing multilateral development banks and DFIs, continuing to catalyze ODA and use it to catalyze domestic investments, and both at the private and the public sector side, as well as work around export credit agencies. On the international private finance side, the recommendations include continuing to harness our remittances. Nigeria has, I believe, the highest remittances of any African country, and just as recently as this year, our remittances have been counted as estimated, according to World Bank, as $19.2 billion so far this year alone, a dramatic increase from last year. So there's recommendations around how to continue to harness those remittances and to better align our investment policies in a way that attracts foreign investments from our citizens in the diaspora, as well as foreign direct investments, better mobilizing VC and angel investment networks, as well as continuing to innovate in the bond market. Nigeria has issued already 2 green bonds, one in 2017 and one in 2019, making us amongst the first to do so, and I think the first to do do so in on the African continent. So you'll see a continued use of dynamic and innovative bond instruments such as green bonds, sukuk bonds, and I would imagine moving forward SDG or social bonds to continue to mobilize funds that would strategically target sectors that would most impact our implementation of the SDGs. Next slide, please. So here I'll speak to very briefly some of the key lessons that we've learned from our journey so far. So it's critical to ensure a government-led process with ownership both at the federal and state level. We've benefited from having a process where all stakeholders have a seat at the table. So government works alongside our partners, both development and private sector, to ensure that the inputs and recommendations for the INFF make sense across board. And also we've leveraged our existing processes at both the federal and state level, including our recently unified Financing, Budgeting and Planning Ministry, as I mentioned, our established office on the SDGs, the current development or the recent finalization of our medium-term national development plan for 2021 to 25, and fiscal reforms aimed at mobilizing domestic revenues. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Nabila, for your presentation. So, ladies and gentlemen, we've heard now from two countries, Indonesia and Nigeria, facing different circumstances, challenges, and opportunities about how they are each using and adapting the INFF approach to strengthen their financing for sustainable development domestically. And so now we'll move on to Mr. Tim Strawson. Mr. Tim, what is the picture across Indonesia, Nigeria, and the other countries developing an INFF? And what are the benefits and outcomes that countries are seeing emerge already through their INFF?
Well, thank you, moderator, and distinguished guests. It's a real pleasure to join you this morning. I think it's been fantastic to hear about the experience of Indonesia and Nigeria and how they're using the INFF approach to shape innovation in financing policy for the SDGs. To answer your question, I'd like to share some results from the stocktake, the INFF Sustainable Investment stocktake that the Indonesian G20 presidency has commissioned us to carry out this year, with a focus on INFFs and the financing strategies that are starting to emerge. We just heard a little bit about the financing strategy from Nigeria, and then particularly within those financing strategies on private finance and on blended finance within them. So if we could go to the first slide. We know, as we've heard in the introductions, and we know well, that countries are facing very difficult circumstances at the moment, that the challenges of recovery from the pandemic, of rising debt instability, rising food and commodity prices, inflation and interest rates, very much a picture of heightened uncertainty and risk over the medium term. But within this context, we're now seeing 86 countries, and that's 15 more than when we did the stocktake last year. 86 countries are using the INFF approach to manage public and private resources, or manage public policy for public and private financing within this complex and challenging context. These are country-led processes. We've heard they're guided by cross-governmental steering committees, typically led by the Ministries of Finance and Planning, that bring together a wide range of stakeholders at the country level to forge innovation and to forge a new and strengthened way forwards on financing strategies. We're seeing across these 86 countries, 39 countries will be developing a financing strategy for the first time. So they've had a national development plan which sets out the aspirations for sustainable development, but haven't had a clear strategy for how the investments needed to realize those aspirations would be realized, and they're using the INFF approach to put that in place. Another 25 countries are strengthening an existing financing strategy, and typically that's been concerned in the past with public investment or public finance, and they're using the INFF approach to take a broader, a more holistic approach towards financing that considers private finance as well. So these financing strategies that we're starting to see emerge are embedded in national, medium and long-term development plans, and they're connecting those aspirations with the full range of policy tools that government has for governing and for mobilizing and aligning public and private investment with national sustainable development aspirations. And I think we're approaching a crucial stage. We've just heard from Nigeria and Indonesia, and indeed over the next 12 months we anticipate around about 40 countries will finalize and will formalize their financing strategy. So if we could go to the next slide. As those countries are working on their financing strategy and taking them forward, we're already seeing a large and diverse range of financing reforms being taken forward. So we did a survey as part of the stocktake, and countries identified more than 250 specific reforms to public and private financing policies that have already been identified for immediate action. And some of these are already starting to yield results. Uzbekistan, for example, issued an SDG bond within the framework of its INFF last year, mobilizing $870 million for investment in 7 SDGs. Cabo Verde has established the world's first blue economy sustainable finance platform. Kyrgyzstan has implemented some changes to the way that it manages tax incentives, which are quite significant in that economy, equivalent to 5% of GDP, so that they're aligned with the SDGs. In Colombia, more than 300 companies are now disclosing their results and contributions and impact towards the SDGs through an SDG corporate tracker that the public and private sectors have developed collectively. So these are just a few examples. The slide behind me, which I won't go through in detail, but highlights the range and diversity of financing policy reforms that countries are already starting to take forwards in a way that responds to the national context, that's grounded in national priorities and national institutions. Within this framework, within this picture, that many of those reforms are focused on private financing, and there are a wide range of policy areas being addressed there. If we could go to the next slide. One area that we're seeing a growing number of countries look at is the question of how to mobilize and incentivize private investment that is catalytic for the SDGs. And more than 40 countries are taking forward a process to systematically map what you might call SDG-aligned investment opportunity areas. So these are areas of investment that have both commercial viability and a strong impact thesis that are characterized by both the potential to mobilize and scale up significant private resources, private investment, with achieving significant SDG impact. And we heard from Indonesia how they've launched the SDG Investor Map themselves recently. More than 450 of these SDG-aligned investment opportunity areas have been identified across all of the countries that have taken this forward within the frame of their INFF. And these are specific sectors, specific subsectors and business models, which, as I said, can be financed commercially, can tap into the private capital that exists domestically and internationally, and help accelerate progress towards the SDGs. Again, I won't go through the details of the slide behind me. There's more detail in the stocktake report. But you can see through the chart some of the most commonly identified sectors that are coming through as countries systematically map these SDG-aligned investment opportunity areas. Sectors such as food and beverage, infrastructure, and others that have very significant implications for food security, for land use, for resource conservation, for livelihoods, and that can have a cascading impact on social progress, on the well-being of individuals and communities, often with a very strong focus on gender equality and marginalized groups. And within these investment opportunity areas, we see a prominent role for blended finance. There are a range of investment models, of business models that can be used to mobilize capital behind these investment opportunity areas. Many of these can be commercially viable, but in around a third of cases, we see that there's some need and case for public support to unlock private capital, and particularly that's true in terms of reaching last mile investments that can advance, leaving no one behind. And we see already, one of the details on the previous slide, there are a large number of countries, more than 25 countries, that as they're developing their financing strategy are taking forwards reforms in blended finance and in public-private financing. So there's a lot of interest in this area. A final word on this, one of the things that I think is crucial and that we're seeing a growing debate around at the country level is when you're mobilizing private capital behind the SDGs, and particularly when you're investing scarce public resources to unlock that private capital, there's a strong need to ensure that private investment really is impact driven. So as countries are considering this question, we're starting to see a growing focus on how to build capacity and processes and for management practices within enterprises that are making those investments that really intentionally integrate sustainability at the heart of those investments. That includes monitoring, but going beyond monitoring to the standards of the investment and business models that's being used. So that's a rather rapid tour through what we're seeing from across INFF, so how we're seeing many of the financing strategies develop and the financing reforms that are being prioritised through them across this very large and diverse range of countries that is using the INFF approach. If we could just go to the last slide. And I'd summarise by saying we see a lot of potential here. We see countries using the INFF approach to develop very ambitious agendas for transforming the financing architecture at the national level, making it more sustainable, making it more inclusive. I think increasingly the focus will turn as these financing strategies are formalised to implementation, to taking forwards those many financing reforms that I highlighted, and probably many more to come as well. And as these financing strategies are formalised and delivery is taking forwards, I think there's a growing demand. Indeed, we see a growing demand from countries to learn from one another as they implement the INFF approach, and to be able to access technical support to deliver these ambitious and often technically complex reform agendas. So one of the things that we looked at in the stock take that we've undertaken was the role of the G20, and the G20 has positioned itself as a leading supporter of country-led INFFs, having first been introduced under the Saudi Arabian presidency a couple of years ago. Then under the Italian presidency last year, G20 leaders endorsed the framework of voluntary support to INFFs. That includes 5 areas. I won't go through them all, but notably including how do we align international cooperation and support behind the priorities coming through country-led INFFs, and how can G20 members engage their domestic constituencies, the domestic technical capacities they hold, the investment communities and others, with the priorities that are being articulated by countries through their INFF processes. So there are some encouraging initial steps being taken forwards. We've recently seen the launch of the INFF Facility, which brings together UNDP, UNDESA, the OECD, EU, Italy and Sweden as a vehicle that can help to take forward some of this commitment, that can broker the demand and supply for technical support for delivering INFFs, and that can act as a platform to exchange between countries. And I think this is one vehicle that can be taken forwards to implement the framework of support. But very much through the stock take, through the discussion today, we wanted to discuss with the G20 and through the Development Working Group, how the G20 can continue to support. There is significant potential through the INFFs that are being agendaed. These are ambitious agendas, ambitious financing strategies that could transform financing at the national level. And there is much need and much demand for technical support to be able to implement those agendas that we're hearing from the country level. So the conversation around how the G20 can respond, how it, following its positioning itself as a key provider of support, how it can respond to really help countries realise the potential of these INFFs is something we'd like to continue to discuss today, and as the stock take continues over the rest of the presidency. Thank you, Moderator.
Thank you, Mr. Tim Strassen, for that presentation, and hopefully we can hear more from our delegates later on during our discussion session. So, yes, I see someone's clapping, so you can, of course, clap. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, we are seeing country-led INFFs develop and some ambitious agendas for reforming financing policies and unlocking both public and private capital in support of national sustainable development visions and the SDGs. And of course, the G20 has positioned itself as playing an important role in the international response to these country-led processes. And now we are turning to the European Union. We have Mr. Guillaume Barrot here. So how does the EU see country-led INFF as a driver of change in financing for SDGs? And how can public and private finance be mobilized for sustainable development? And how does the EU support such efforts?
Thank you, Daniel. Well, for the first question, it's related in today's world of pandemics, conflicts, unsustainable debt levels, and climate crisis, we need to channel investment to where it's needed most. An integrated approach is key. Country-led INFFs are essential for accelerating progress towards the SDGs and for doing so in an integrated manner. Through INFFs, countries take forward financing reforms to mobilize and align public and private financing with their national sustainable development priorities. We strongly believe and INFF can be key tool to mobilize and align public and private financing with their national sustainable development priorities. One of the main challenges in designing holistic financing strategies is building a strong and broad in-country dialogue and participation. The inclusive process of an INFF based on a broad stakeholder consultation and dialogue between, for example, ministries, private sector, and civil society provides an opportunity to overcome this challenge. As many countries advance in their INFF implementation, it is important to reflect on the key lessons for building a more holistic, integrated approach to SDG financing at the national level. The INFF Sustainable Investment Stockade provides an excellent opportunity to reflect on lessons learned so far. Since the beginning, the European Union has been a strong supporter of INFF for three main reasons. First one is that it supports long-term investment and strengthens medium and long-term planning, and is a key tool for countries to achieve the SDGs and the objectives of the Paris Agreement. The second one is it's a tool for transparency, with a full view of resources for sustainable development. Providers of development finance like the EU can better tailor their support. And third, there's a tool for effective multilateralism, because they create coherence and consistency in a very broad offer of assessment tools and diagnostics. As INFFs progress, there is a growing demand from countries for technical support to deliver those promises. To meet this strong demand, the EU is financing, together with Italy and Sweden, the INFF Technical Assistance Facility, which has a joint secretariat comprising UNDP, UNDESA, and the OECD. The facility responds to country demand, providing technical assistance as financing strategies are developed, and facilitates exchange across countries and access to methodological guidance. Indonesia is one of the countries already receiving support from the INFF TA facility. The government of Indonesia is offering a leading example for INFF progress towards a more systematic, holistic approach to achieve sustainable development objectives. We are pleased that INFF has been endorsed by the government of Indonesia, which can use this platform as G20 president to endorse the approach as a regional and global model. As I said, we really welcome the INFF Sustainable Investment Stocktake as presented here today, showcasing country progress in implementing INFF, the opportunity of SDGs-aligned investment opportunity area, and the role of blended finance. To conclude, the first question, the EU looks forward to continuing and deepening collaboration and cooperation on country-led INFFs. As regards your second question, related to public and private finance to be mobilized for sustainable development, first, mobilizing capital for an inclusive and sustainable transition in which no one is left behind will be critical to collectively deliver on the Paris Agreement objectives, the Sustainable Development Goals, as well as to close the global infrastructure investment gap. The EU is strongly committed to the climate objectives of the Paris Agreement and also to accompany its partner countries in their transition from harmful fossil fuels, not least coal, to renewable energy sources. Public finance, of course, has an important role to play in these efforts. The European Union therefore comments that Indonesia pioneers in several public finance management fields, for instance, the ongoing PEFA climate exercise. Another example is the motto followed by the government of Indonesia on the path of its PFM reform, collect more and spend better, that comes straight from Addis Ababa in 2015. However, public finance will not be sufficient to bridge the SDG financing gap, and private finance needs to be mobilized as well. We believe that sustainable finance can play a key role in enabling private financial flows to be channeled towards sustainable investments. The EU's Green Deal and the Global Gateway strategies are some of the key examples of the EU efforts in this direction. The G20 Sustainable Finance Working Group developed a comprehensive sustainable finance roadmap last year to put emphasis on the global green and sustainable economic recovery. Under the G20 Indonesian presidency, the Development Working Group is also making important progress on these issues, including in the field of sustainable finance. We look forward to the outcome of the discussions on the G20 principles for blended finance, which are being developed by the G20 Development Working Group. We believe it is important that blended finance structures are anchored in local financing priorities as captured by the INFFs. Furthermore, we need to ensure additionality so as to not crowd out international and domestic private capital. Blended finance needs to be complemented by support to build and strengthen an ecosystem with appropriate standards, framework, labels, and instruments that facilitates sustainable private capital flows in the long run. In this regard, it's remarkable to see Indonesia's achievement in sustainable finance, both in the development of frameworks such as the Indonesian taxonomy, the Taxonomy Hijau, launched this year, and the development of its sustainable related bond market with regular issuance of green bond sukuk. I've heard also that there is a blue bond coming soon. I would be pleased to hear about that. The EU would welcome the opportunity to work with Indonesia and other countries in this field, benefiting from mutual experiences in scaling up sustainable finance and related instruments. In particular, we stand ready to work with partners on 3 concrete initiatives. First of all, we want to cooperate with countries in their effort to build a sustainable investment climate, attracting more and more international private capital to fund sustainable projects. Specifically, we can support partners to further attract European institutional investors and provide them with confidence on the greenness of their investment vis-à-vis the European frameworks and disclosure regulations. Among other things, the aim would be to bring clarity on the similarities and differences between frameworks so that investors can easily identify investment opportunities. Second, our initiative on promoting green bonds will be able to provide the risking to green bond issuance at sovereign, sub-sovereign, and private sector level. Anchor investments into these issuance will build confidence among private investors, crowding private capital, making the green bond issuance even more attractive and potentially leading to lower cost of debt. Third, so as to leverage additional private finance for sustainable investments, the EU is preparing a comprehensive strategy to scale up sustainable finance in low and middle income countries with the support of a dedicated high-level expert group. The high-level expert group will provide recommendations which will then inform the Commission strategy scheduled for adoption in 2023. I am confident that our mutual experience and ambitions on sustainable finance and green bonds will yield fruitful collaboration. The EU stands ready to work and continue to work with partners and to share our EU experience in building a conducive, sustainable finance ecosystem, which will be key to finance the SDGs. Thank you.
Thank you for your explanations to us, Mr. Guillaume. Ladies and gentlemen, as mentioned by Mr. Guillaume, just now with countries developing ambitious agendas for change through their INFF, there's also a growing demand from the country level for exchange and technical support to deliver the policy solutions being prioritized and to mobilize capital for the SDGs. So now I will invite Mr. Paul Horrocks to share the views from the OECD on this matter. So how can INFF catalyze private finance in support of the SDGs, including through blended finance? And then what role can the INFF Facility, which the OECD has co-launched with UNDP and UNDESA, play in brokering the demand and supply of technical support to help fulfill the potential of country-led INFF?
Thank you. Thanks for the question. Just to say thanks to Bappenas for organizing this and the warm welcome, and it's great to be back in Bali. So, and I think a lot of this, the question that's been asked has been in a way answered by the panel, but I'll give a bit of a shot at giving a bit of an OECD perspective on what we've been working on and other actors in this space. So if we could go first to the first slide, thank you. So this will give you a bit of a sort of scene setting. To the next slide, please. Thanks a lot. So if you look at this side, I mean, what we're trying to do essentially is mobilize, and using all that funds that are out there. So as we've seen, there's quite a lot of activities in this space in terms of investments from DFIs, commercial investors. That all needs to be pulled in to the SDGs, which is the challenge in which INFFs are critical in helping to do that. But the finance also needs to be aligned with the SDGs. We've seen quite a lot of finance that claims to be aligned and always misaligned, so ensuring alignment. And then ultimately what you want is the impact on the ground. So the jobs, the women getting the opportunities, you know, leaving no one behind essentially. So blended finance is a source that allows the mobilization, the alignment, and the impact happening. But this all needs to happen with the integrated national financing frameworks. And those can also be used to better inform what blended finance does and how it happens and what it does. So really important, the relationships that, and having those INFS in place and using the blended finance to be better informing those INFs, but also feeding back into blended finance. So we could go to the next slide. So the platform that we've been working with our partners, UNDP, UNDESA, I mean, this is critical. So having this facility, it's a great announcement to have that. And the OECD, I'm not going to sort of go over what we've heard a lot about this facility, so I'm going to quickly go through. I think everybody in the room has got a fairly good idea about what the facility does. But the OECD, working with the DAC, will be able to coordinate, will be able to provide technical assistance, and to be able to feed back into the DAC how those INFS are working. So it's really a strong partnership with UNDP and UNDESA. So critical to sort of having those in place. And it also facilitates peer learning with the DAC members, engagement in terms of coordination, and then channel input and knowledge from the INF into donors' activities. So a critical tool. If I can go to the next slide, please. So I've spoke a bit about all the other program approach, what the OECD plans to do. And I think the role of the INFF is bringing all these different elements together, and each actor's got a certain sort of skill set and community that they can bring to the INFF facility. So by having this, it's much stronger than the sum of its parts. If we go to the next slide, and I'll explain a bit about how blended finance sort of works within that whole approach. You've heard a lot about blended finance. What does it exactly mean, though? So let's just, also go back to what fundamentally the definition is. As you can see on the left, it's sort of financing sources. So what we're looking at is public and private. Those are sort of the mixtures that we're trying to mobilize the commercial finance at the top. And that's the public. Why public? Because a lot of pensions want to get financial returns, but they also want to invest in the SDGs. Now, what's the use of those transactions? We've heard a lot about some of the structures from Indonesia, from Nigeria. Those structure things like PPPs, funds and facilities, risk transfer mechanisms. But you'll also see in that financing structure things like PTSMI. There's a DFI that will be using those structures to sort of engage. And what do I mean by instruments? Well, the definition that the OECDs have taken is very wide, so that it can encompass everything that donors and actors and developing countries have been working in this space, and pulling that all together to focus on the SDGs, because our definition is very sort of inclusive and includes concessional and non-concessional. And the concessional and non-concessional is using things like guarantees, first loss, insurance, but also grants to mobilize those critical volumes of private sector that's sitting out there and need to be brought into the SDG goals. So that's the definition. I'm not going to read it out to you. It's pretty evident, very concise and short, but underneath that there's lots of various components. Can we go to the next slide, please? There is a certain issue in terms of blended finance. We've had a lot of success, I think, to everybody in this room and to these initiatives that are being put forward by Indonesia and Nigeria. However, the scale of the challenge, we all know, is massive. And those volumes at 48 billion look big, but when you look at the challenge, they're still very small. So we need to scale more. Those are the instruments that we've been using to sort of achieve that scale. You can see sort of a gradual increase in terms of direct investments, but also in terms of guarantees, which I know the EU is working on, and that's quite a strong instrument that we've seen a lot of interest from the private sector to use guarantees. So the issue remains, though, that we're going for the low-hanging fruit, the easy options. And we're not going to the more challenging sectors, agriculture, social sectors, that also critically are the big gaps in the SDGs. So we need a lot more financing. So that's where blended finance needs to focus more in the future, which is where INFFs are also critical in terms of addressing those gaps and identifying them, where you'll have more PPP-type structures. The other issue is we don't want to leave anybody behind. And at the moment, we've only got one LDC. And that is a bit of an anomaly because Mozambique managed to mobilize a lot of LNG projects in that particular year. So there aren't any LDCs in terms of the top 20 countries that managed to mobilize. SIDS are also a critical area that need to be addressed with the SDGs, and they're also not getting the funding. If I could go to my next slide, please. So there's the G20 has been developing targeted blended finance principles. And these are really sort of looking at things like the local context. The local context is key. We've heard about, we need to understand what's happening in Indonesia, where their priorities are, and align the funding and financing to those. So that's critical. Also understanding where Indonesia is in terms of its capital markets development, where Sukuk, where it can go and take its GSSS bonds initiatives. So we need to be very much aligned with what's happening domestically. We need to support that financial system and market development. You need to aim, though, for scale. We've all heard about the opportunities, but we still need to think big and also take more risks. And that's where guarantees and GSSS bonds and sustainability-linked bonds, which have a long tenor, match the profile of long-term investors in terms of the risk return, but also the externalities or climate goals that we're trying to address. So a unique tool. So I look forward to hearing about the blue bond from Indonesia. We also need to improve the impact, and impact on the ground, and that means what's happening in terms of all this financing, the big numbers, but what does it mean actually concretely on the ground? So that's really important. We have the evidence that we can demonstrate that and feed it back to stakeholders that are putting public money, but also to the private sector that are putting their funds into these initiatives. But we also need to think a bit about stakeholder consultation. I mean, and I know that there's a Blended Finance Alliance that will help understand and communicate exactly what blended finance is and help propagate that and build confidence and capacity in developing countries in order for these types of transactions to happen. They're not easy, they're complicated, so they do need a lot of sort of support to get to those, building those markets and building the financial markets that can support the SDGs. If we can go to the next slide. So these are some of the issues and ideas that we've done in terms of for the G20 and with our partner G20 countries. We've looked at sort of turning the blended finance principles into reality. So we've carried out some consultations with Bappenas in terms of talking to the Seychelles and Guatemala and looking at what that would look like. Our future plans are consultations with Egypt, Zambia, Rwanda, but of course we've also had consultations with AVPN, and we'll be looking at building other initiatives with these other big pools of capital and activities that are happening out there. If we can go to the final slide, I think that's it. That I think I've hit my 10 minutes, so thank you.
Thank you very much. So, ladies and gentlemen, we've heard from our speakers about their views on the INFF issue, and now we are going to enter the Q&A session. So we are going to take questions from the audience. We are going to take questions from the audience here on the floor and also from our online audience. So please, if you have questions, you may stand up and forward it to our speakers. Please also introduce yourself and the institution that you are representing today. And the committee will help you to give up the microphone so that you can speak clearly to our speakers. Is there any questions at the moment? Yes, can you please stand up?
Thank you. And I'm Loredana Magni from the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation. And so I would just want to thank you, the presidency, for organizing this side event. It's special on these specific topics that we consider to be quite relevant. And because of this importance, as I was mentioned by the panelists, some of the speakers, we had this considered as a top priority within our presidency last year. And we are very happy and that to see that there's a lot of advancement in the process, and that the G20 guidelines and on the major framework on INFF is creating the space for engaging not only G20 members as today, but also a larger membership and the stakeholder in this sort of importance of engaging, sharing what is happening. And I was really impressed by the colleague from UNDP and this stock take that this year, thanks to the guidelines, the framework that we approved last year, and also the presidency this year, the Indonesian presidency is committed to take forward about these 250 reforms, financial reforms all over the world. So, and how this approach is really creating a sort of culture within countries that they have their own guiding and leadership in this process, how to be transformative within their own policies, how to advance the achievement of these SDG goals, so that we have been seeing that they're really been hit by different multiple crises of nature over this of the most recent years. And so, having said that, as a general comment, we really would hope that this type of format and discussion could take advance in the future years, also with the India presidency that is next in line, and also with the Brazilian that which follow afterwards. And especially, I have a question related to, we have been heard this morning two different stages of the implementation of this approach by countries, Indonesia and Nigeria. And one of the challenge is that they both face at this stage is capacity building, because it's very articulated, this process. I mean, having a reform which is trying to redefine new paradigms of how to work, and really requires a strong engagement of the different type of stakeholders at different level. But how, in terms of capacity, how, for instance, especially for Indonesia, because that's been more experience in that area, how they did really address that. In doing so, how did they ensure to reach the last mile? Because this reform should meant to be for the great benefit for all the population in the living in the given countries. And at the same time, the same question relates to the Nigeria, which is a country more is at a different stage, but how they intend to make sure that the last mile is reached. How the speaker mentioned that is challenging to have the different stakeholders to sit at the table, which is quite important. It's not only to have a seat at the table, but you also to have to establish a sort of mechanism to capture what are their needs. So these is one question and a comment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we are still taking more questions before we let the speakers to answer. Okay, so there's a lady at the front. Since we have a very short time, would you please be very brief? Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Aidi. I'm representing Dala Institute. I really appreciate all the panelists and their great presentations. I think it's very insightful, and I'm glad to see the progress of how things become more converging and integrated. I think I would just like to give some reflection questions around how we're responding to shocks and how do we prepare more adaptive framework. So actually I'm asking, or maybe everybody can ask, how adaptive framework that we can prepare, how flexible can it be in responding to shocks that we see there more and more unpredictable events are coming in the next near future. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for the questions. Next question, please. Is there any other question? You may raise your hand. Okay, how about from the online audience, the committee? Okay, we don't have more questions, so I will now leave the floor open, and I'm going to ask Ibu Fifi maybe to answer the first question first, and after that I'm going to go to Ms. Nabila to answer from the Nigerian's perspective.
Thank you for the questions. They are great questions, and it's really a challenge for Indonesia and maybe other countries also to coordinate among ourselves. It's easier to be said than done. So the INFF actually is not built based on an empty paper, but it's really the ones from, it's built based on the one what we have. So first, we mainstream the SDGs targets and indicators in the midterm development plan. Around 124 targets out of 169 targets and around 289 indicators is also part of the development agenda. So it's analog like one stone for two birds for us. Achieving our development agenda means also achieving the SDGs. The other things that we also prepare is providing or implement or developing the instruments for the SDGs. It includes the roadmap, the action plans at the national as well as the local level, and also following the updates on the metadata. Up until now, we have the third editions of the metadata in order to have a reference to measure the impact. And based on that, now on the SDGs action plan, we also incorporate the activities not only from the government and local government, but also from the businesses, philanthropies, universities, and NGOs. So by having that, the SDGs provides a framework of collaborations, as well as we know the gap and the homework actually in one of it or for the capacity. So indeed, when we aware that there are only 8 years remaining for achieving the SDGs, the homework is actually mainly, big portion is for the capacity. We are talking about not in national level, but also at the regions. So I do hope that by sharing with the INFF or other INF countries, we can also have some vehicle as well as opportunity to build the capacity together.
Thank you, Ibu Fifi. Now I'm going to let Ms. Nabila to answer the questions from the Nigerian experience. Is he still online?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Oh, good. So both excellent questions, and I agree. The notion of a seat at the table is a lot easier said than done. So similar to Indonesia, we really benefited from a great foundation in terms of existing structures such as the Office of the Senior Special Assistant to the President on the SDGs, which has worked closely with my ministry in terms of mainstreaming the SDGs both into the national development plans, but also cascading them down to the state level. From an INFF perspective, initially it was quite challenging, especially because we signed on and begun our INFF process as we were grappling with COVID. So part of the challenge for us was both creating capacity, but then also getting people's attention. Initially, people would say, this is yet another process that's being imposed on us. Leave us alone. Let us focus on this other more important work. And we really treated the capacity building as an iterative process, both for ourselves at the core working group level, but then also at the state level. And one of the, I think, really exciting workshops that we had was convened with all the state commissioners of both finance and planning from all the states, as well as the SDG focal persons. And that was an opportunity to both engage on the INFF DFA at the time, but also get their feedback, get their firsthand accounts of what their understanding was. So I think that capacity building has to be an iterative one. I don't think there's going to be a point at which we can say we're completely done, but it really involves state level ownership and engagement. So not a top-down approach, but a bottom-up, top-down sort of collaborative approach. And then in terms of the adaptive frameworks, I think for Nigeria, the INFF itself, the process of doing that and doing it at a accelerated level, maybe compared to some other countries, has been part of our working toward being adaptive and thinking critically about our post-COVID recovery and what that means for our financing and our coordination around mobilizing financing in the country. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that answer. So now I'm going to go to Pak Denny. You can also add to what Ibu Fifi has already said, and also maybe you can answer the second question about how we can be more adaptive to shocks in the future. As we already know that some countries are already experiencing recession, so what about Indonesia?
Okay, I think I would like to address the first question about how to create a cultures within the country. In Indonesia case, you know that our financial sector is relatively shallow. So that's why the government in this case play as a pioneers We create innovations, and we expect that it will be followed by private sectors. But the key question is how to encourage the private sector to follow our step is pricing benefits. You know that issuing the thematic bond like green sukuks or SDG bonds require a lot of efforts, from development of the frameworks, project selections, monitoring, until the impact report. So without significant pricing benefit, why bother we issue such securities? So that's why we are calling for institutional investors, international community to provide more meaningful pricing benefit or greenium to countries or to corporations who issue ESG securities or to use the sustainable financing tools. And about the adaptive, I think that's the way what we are from the government side, try to make our financing strategy more flexible. For example, we're talking about thematic bonds. We are using the budget tagging systems. We are not using the specific project financings, because let's say if one project is failed or cannot deliver intended purpose, then we can change flexibly to another project if we use the budget tagging process. It's different with the project financing. With project financings, the fund that collected only can be used to these projects, no matter what. But using the budget tagging system, we as Treasury has more flexibility to ensure that our projects can be changed in order to achieve our main goal, the SDG objective. Back to you, Valerina. Thank you.
Okay. Before I let Mr. Tim answer the next question, I will have to take one more question. Sir, you want to ask the questions? Okay, this is going to be the last question for this session. Is there any committee that can provide the microphone? Okay. Okay.
Yes, thank you. Pedro Henriquez, delegate from the European Union in the Development Working Group. So, in fact, I had a question to Tim and also to the name representative from the Minister of Finance of Indonesia. But just to indicate the reason why the European Union decided to support the UN and UNDP in this process is because in meetings we are having with the UN in 2017, 2018, when we were assessing, as you know, there is every year in the UN high-level political forum, there is this national reviews on how each UN member is implementing the 2030 agenda and SDGs. And the assessment was made is that from all the national reviews that have been presented in New York at that time, very few, really very few were addressing the financing. It was reviews, how the countries were developing strategies to implement SDGs, but very few were addressing, but where is the financing?
Okay.
And then, it was then that, this INFF is nothing new. It came from the Addis Ababa Action Agenda. But it was, in a certain way, forgotten. And then it was really the possibility to use this thing that was in the Addis Ababa Action Agenda to help, to make the national reviews and the strategies of the different countries, not to address just, their path towards the SDGs, but where is the financing for that?
Okay.
And now, my question to Tim is, the national reviews that have been done more recently in the last 2 years, are integrating much more this financing aspect, since now we have all these high number of countries developing the INFFs. Has been a change in terms of the content of the national reviews. And now from the representatives from the Minister of Finance from Indonesia, I think this provides a very good also framework for cooperation between the Development Working Group, Development track, and the Finance track. It's something we have been discussed since years, the cooperation between the two. So it's a question, but also really an advice to use this process also as better cooperation, and this also is discussed within the finance track and by the finance ministers.
Okay,
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, Mr. Tim, you may answer the questions first.
Thank you, moderator, and very good questions. To pick up on a couple of them, on the question of reaching the last mile, I think what we're seeing is the INFF prompts questions about the impact of financing, perhaps in new ways. So it brings actors around the table that are responsible for policy areas that perhaps are often or historically have been connected with a much narrower part of the agenda. So to take investment promotion as an example, for instance, investment promotion is often connected with the economic or the financial objectives of a national objectives. But within the frame of the INFF, we're seeing a growing number of countries connect it much more widely to the Sustainable Development Plan. And I think to give an example that we looked at in the report, Thailand has, like Indonesia, recently launched a list of the SDG-aligned investment opportunity areas that it's prioritizing. And agriculture is a very strong area, smart agriculture. And agriculture in Thailand employs a third of the workforce. But there's a difference between the activities of women and men. Women are largely responsible more for post-harvest, more labour-intensive activities, whereas men are more typically active in some of the more mechanised processes within agriculture. So as you take forwards investments in smart agriculture, the way that you do it can either address some of those gender inequalities or amplify them. So the way that you incentivise the investments that are being made with a link to reaching the last mile, I think is very important. And we're seeing, through the INFFs, I mentioned the example of Kyrgyzstan, which has changed the way that it manages its tax incentives so that they are aligned to the SDGs and they are considering these social and sustainable impacts. So I think we're seeing the INFF prompt that question of connection between financing and results from policy areas in a new way. To take Pedro's question around the change that we're seeing, I haven't looked at the VNR specifically, but I do know there was a study, I think it was in 2019, which looked at 100-odd national development plans at that time, and only a quarter or so had any kind of financing strategy. I think less than 30% were costed. So, as you say, and I think that's reflected in the VNRs too, as you say, there was a significant gap. I can't say for sure that it's being reflected in the VNRs now, but I would anticipate so, because we're seeing these financing strategies that I've mentioned being developed, sitting in that space that's existed before, that gap between aspirations and the investments that are needed. As I said, around 40 countries will develop their financing strategy in the next year. So I would think that would play through in the VNRs, if not already, then certainly in the years to come. Thanks.
Thank you. Pak Denny?
Thank you, B. I guess Bu Vivi will be the right person to answer, but let me see. You know that why Indonesia be able to connect between the SDG target with the financial resources. One of the factor is the institutional coordinations. We have Bappenas that becoming the coordinators for allocating this program, is also the financing needs. And other factor that quite significant is as I mentioned earlier, the CBT, the climate budget tagging. The climate budget tagging initially is implemented to track or to monitor the projects related with the green projects. But now, this tagging process can be used to another projects for socials, for blue economy, even for gender equality and so on. So with this system, we can monitor and in line the SDG objective or goals with the financial resources needed. I think that's why we are quite fortunate having the CBT that it was essentially helped by UNDP to track the green projects, but later on we can use to tracking or to monitor others project that related with SDG objective.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you very much for the questions, and thank you very much, speakers. Unfortunately, we have running out of time for this panel discussion on session 1. So with that, I would like to conclude that this has been an insightful first panel discussion. So the DWG has had many discussions on INFF over the last 2 years, and it has been great to hear of both the emerging experiences in 2 countries, Indonesia and Nigeria, which are using the approach in different ways. We've also heard how these are 2 countries among the much larger number of 86 countries worldwide who are adopting and tailoring the INFF approach to their national priorities, institutions, and circumstances. Moreover, we also heard from our speakers about their reflections and actions that are being taken by some G20 members in order to scale up their support for country-led INFF in response to country demand. Now, the aim of the continuing focus on INFF is within the DWG is to keep G20 members informed about how these frameworks are being used at the country level and to encourage you to take forward the G20 framework or voluntary support that was agreed by leaders last year. So with that, thank you very much, speakers, for sharing your views today. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of the first panel discussion. Please give applause to our speakers today. Thank you, and now I'm handing over this time to the MC.
Okay, for all speakers and moderator, please remain on stage. Please remain on stage for all speakers because we would like to follow the program with the group photo session. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, please give big round of applause for all the speakers for the first panel discussion in this beautiful location, and also our distinguished moderator. To all the panelists and moderators that are already on stage, we please you to be upstanding and hold the INFF report book upon your post for the photo sessions. Once again, please, for the moderator and also the speakers. Yes, and also the speakers, please hold the INFF report book upon your post for the photo session, and also allow us to welcome our dignitaries and the second session speakers to join us on stage. So please welcome to the stage the Honorable Mr. Tantowi Yahya. Please be on stage for the group photo session, and don't forget to hold up the INFF report book for pose for the photo session. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we also would like to invite our speakers that already joining us virtually, Ms. Nabila Agil, Mr. Enrico Hariyantoro, Mr. Said Zaidan Shah, Ms. Sinta Kamdani, and also Ms. Nomin dari Angcher, to please kindly face the camera and take your best pose. And not only we will take a picture with the speakers on site here, but we also would like to invite all the speakers who are joining us virtually to please face the camera. For all the speakers, please kindly remain on stage. We would like to take a picture with the whole speakers who are joining us virtually and on site here. Okay, this is with the speakers who are joining us virtually. For the all speakers, distinguished speakers who are joining us virtually, please give your best smile as well for taking a group photo with all the speakers who are on site here at Singaraja Hall 2, Bali, Nusa Dua Convention Center. Allow me to do the countdown on 3. 1, 2, 3. Please give your best smile, and once again, please give big round of applause for the speakers and moderator. Thank you very much. And please remain on stage, because after this, we would like to present the token of appreciation. We would like to welcome in joining us on stage to the Honorable Mr. Taufik Hanafi to hand over the token of appreciation. the Honorable Mr. Taufik Hanafi, Secretary for the Ministry of National Development Planning and Chief Secretary for National Development Planning Agency. Please be on stage for hand over the token of appreciation for all the speakers. And for our distinguished moderator, you are pleased to accompany the speakers for the appreciation. Ladies and gentlemen, can we give big round of applause once again for all the speakers? And this procession of hand over the token of appreciation on behalf of organizing committee would like to say thank you very much for all the speakers for joining us in this important meeting to deliver a valuable and insightful session during the panel discussion. And after this, please remain on stage, Mr. Taufik Hanafi, to please be on stage with all speakers and also moderator, because the following program is group photo session with the token of appreciation. I will do the count. Allow me to lead the photo session. 3, 2, 1, and smile. All right, thank you all the speakers and our distinguished moderator. You may all be returned to your seats on the floor. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, while we are preparing into the second session, allow me to inform several announcements regarding our event for today. There will be no coffee break in between session. However, there will be a coffee and snacks provided at the foyer area of this room. You are pleased to serve yourself and bring it back into your seats while the discussion panel will still be on running. You can download all the material of today's event by scanning the QR code that will be provided later on by the committee. Within the souvenir bag, there will also be an INFF report book provided for all of you from the organizer. And later, on this afternoon, we will have the G20 side event within this room. For those of you who are interested on the discussion, you are welcome to join. Ladies and gentlemen, would like to remind once again for the audience who are physically present, please keep your social distancing and be mindful of COVID-19 health protocol. Kindly remind, we would also like to inform that all delegates and committee attending today have conducted rapid antigen swab with negative results and complete full dose of COVID-19 vaccines. So distinguished delegates, participants, ladies and gentlemen, who are joining us on site here or virtually, please be ready for the second session of panel discussion. Once again, we would like to inform you that will be a coffee and snacks provided at the foyer area of this room. You are pleased to serve yourself and bring it back into your seats while the discussion panel will still be on running. And after this, we are going to the second session of panel discussion. And please be ready, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. Honorable participants, we will now proceed to begin the second of panel discussion, INFF operationalization. Let us welcome back on stage our distinguished moderator, Valerina Daniel. Please be on stage.
Thank you, MC, for that kind introduction. Now, ladies and gentlemen, while you're enjoying your coffee break, we are going to continue our discussion today with the session 2 with the topic of INFF operationalization. And for this session, we are joined offline and online by 6 prominent speakers. They are Mrs. Ratih Purbasarikania, Director of Natural Resource Planning, Ministry of Investment, or BKPM. And then Mr. Enrico Harriantoro, Head of Integrated Financial Services Sector Policy Group, Financial Service Authority of OJK. Mr. Said Zaidansyah, Deputy Country Coordinator, ADB Indonesia. Mrs. Sinta Kamdani, Vice Chairwoman of Kadin, or Indonesian Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Ms. Nomindari Ekhtur, CEO of Mongolian Sustainable Finance Association, and Mr. Tantowi Yahya, President of United in Diversity. So without further ado, I would like to invite our speaker to come on stage, Mr. Tantowi, and also please give a warm applause to our speakers online.
Connectionnya jelek.
Okay, we are going to start our second session by asking to Mrs. Sinta Kamdani. Okay, she's already joined us virtually. So, Ms. Sinta, I would like to ask you, how do you enforce greater alignment between private capital and SDGs? And what does your experience in Kadin tells you when it comes to enabling environment to attract private investment for SDGs? So, and also, how do you see the role of INFF in helping to effectively mobilize private finance for SDGs? The screen is yours, Ms. Sinta Kamdani.
Thank you, Varia. Thank you for this opportunity. Unfortunately, since the event is running very late, I will not be able to stay very long. So let me share our thoughts. Basically, as you know, the private sector accounts for 85% of all investment worldwide, and it represents close to 75% of global climate financial flows. In Indonesia, there is a growing trend of investment towards the climate agenda, which is of course part of the SDG. For us in Kadin, the Indonesia Chamber of Commerce and Industry, which is the umbrella of all businesses in Indonesia, we are committed in taking joint action to advance the 2030 agenda for SDG through increasingly involving the private sectors. We are, of course, in collaboration with many institutions, including UNDP, and we are ready to promote the application of sustainable principles, support an agenda to ensure that no one, of course, are left behind, and also formulating financing for climate action and sustainable development. The commitment, I think, will ensure that both promote more substantial private sector contribution to the SDG in critical initiatives, such as facilitating private sector transition to clean energy. So I want to just give you an example of how we're doing this also on the energy transition. And we really believe that INFF effectively mobilize private finance for the SDG, and it can effectively help mobilizing the private finance with a framework for policies and institutional structure designed to take a more holistic approach towards managing and mobilizing all financing, domestic and private sectors. And we also see that INFF can provide a framework for financial national sustainable development priorities and SDG at the country level. So with that in hand, the role of the private sector can be assisted to help achieve the SDG better and achieve the country's aims. Aside from this, INFF can also help identify and implement policy and reform to increase and better align financing towards the achievement of national sustainable development priorities. Now, each country has its own capacity and has this distinct processes, challenges, and limit factors in financing SDG. So the INFF might work at the most effective model. And I believe that it can boost the private sector goal to achieve the SDG better, as we can see that it can mobilize additional financing to support the development priorities. Now, the example that I wanted to share are an energy transition, for example. Yeah, there are two key measures that we can pursue, including increasing total capital flow and redistributing capital allocation. To increase the capital flow, we have identified two potential levers that would require support from all stakeholders, including from private, public, and other institutions. The first lever to increase total capital flow to green infrastructure is to accelerate, of course, the PPP deployment, especially by helping to improve green infrastructure project financial attractiveness. Now, considering that public funds are significantly constrained due to the COVID-19 pandemic as well, private sector participants through a public-private partnership scheme will be pivotal to fulfill the needs to develop green project infrastructure. The second lever is to increase to introduce the innovative financing scheme, as it is also seen in the G20 work that we are currently doing. For example, SME loan collaboration with multilateral organizations such as Sustainable Development Funds from Green Climate Fund, UNDP, World Bank, and AD other organizations, as well as blended financing, a more structural approach that allows a project less favorable tranches to be funded by public or philanthropy capital sources, which allowing also private investors to fund tranches with better risk-return profile. And lastly, we also need to consider how we spend our existing capital. And we need to ensure that enough capital to support for transition from existing brown to green asset. We also need to ensure a balance between security and affordability and green transition, and it will be effective with the nationally integrated financial framework. I would like to just share a little bit also, if I may, about the work that we're doing in the B20. As you know, B20 is the engagement group of the G20, where all the businesses and global business leaders are part of this, and we are preparing now policy recommendations for the G20 government. And with this, we are actually we are well aligned with the SDG through task forces. So each task force has 6 task forces and 1 action council, and they're all the policy recommendations are aligned with SDG. I would like to give you example in finance and infrastructure. We brought up 2 policy recommendation for affordable, suitable sources of financing for infrastructure, and drove also collaboration between countries to accelerate a just transition toward a net zero world. Furthermore, to the policy action of the policy recommendation on affordable and sustainable sources of financing for infrastructure, the B20 delivers the importance of improving public and private sector support to mobilize commercial finance and infrastructure projects. So it proves that the recommendation is well aligned with the SDG number 30, which is climate action. And I see that B20 Indonesia has comprehensively covered the most pressing financial and sustainable infrastructure issue through those recommendations. Is the slides being, okay. So this is some of the example. And also in the energy sustainability and climate task force, they have 1 policy recommendation with enhancing global cooperation on ensuring a just, orderly, and affordable transition to sustainable energy use across developed and developing countries. This is also aligning to number 30. And on trade and investment, policy recommendation 4, it emphasizes how to make trade and investment impactful driver for greener and more sustainable development in line with SDG. One of the B20 task force mentioned SDG in one of their policy recommendation is also related to number 9, which is industry, innovation, and infrastructure. So these are some of the things that we are currently doing in aligning some of the policy recommendation. The B20 in Indonesia support a more concrete and tangible program in the form of Global Blended Finance Alliance as well. And this is also, I think, something that we will be putting through, working together with Cerita Corona for submission to the G20. So if you see that many of these task force are aligning the policy to the SDG, and we will be, when we will submit to the government, I think that is clearly, you know, you can really see how these the drivers can really support also progress on the SDG level. So I hope that gives you a sense what we are currently doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Sinta Kamdani, for your presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, now we're moving on to Ibu Rati. Ibu Rati, how do you see the role of Ministry of Investment in easing the entry market barriers to unlock private capital towards SDGs-related projects? And also, please answer this question. How do you see the value of INFF in supporting the mobilization of private capital?
Thank you, Bu Pelerina. We will respond to your question. For the first, how do you see the role of Ministry of Investment in easing the entry market barrier to unlock the private capital toward SDGs-related projects? For the first, that the Indonesian government has enacted Law 11 in the year 2020 on job creation, with 52 implementing regulation in 11 clusters, including business permit and the investment ecosystem. Now we simplify process and improve licensing certainty through the risk-based approach of online single submission. The Ministry of Investment also provide end-to-end investment services from the assessment stage to production, including the bottlenecking facilitation to solve constraints that cause certain projects to stall. At the policy level, we are also trying to attract investment in strategic sector and regions through the provision of various fiscal facilities, such as tax holiday for pioneer industries, tax allowance, investment allowance, super tax deduction, and import duty exemption. Please, next slide. Aside from policy support, the key to sustainable DI development in Indonesia lies in the availability of various financing support options that can be offered by both the government and the private sector. As we know that the investment in sustainable project is likely not as profitable as conventional investment project. Therefore, it's important for prospective investors to know that there are financing options that can be utilized. For example, the waste-to-energy power plant investment project. From the policy perspective, we support project realization. We offer a tax holiday with 50 until 100% corporate income tax exemption for up to 20 years and a tipping fee when the project enters the production stage. From the financing perspective, it would be great if we could connect potential investor with private financing institutions that have the same interest and vision in the funding sustainable investment project. At the Ministry of Investment, for example, since 3 years ago, we have formulating investment project ready to offer, or we call it IFRO. Our objective in producing this IFRO is to develop project that internalize the SDGs aspect to attract the investor. In order to do so, we consult with several financial institutions such as Bank Mandiri and the Tropical Landscape Finance Facility to gain their insight regarding the financial agencies and preference for financing this kind of sustainable investment project. Next slide, please. Speaking about project financing, I think INFF has a very strategic role in boosting, in fact, investing in Indonesia. It would become such a major input for us in the Ministry of Investment if INFF could identify and consolidate various programs and funding, financing, guarantee scheme from the government and other relevant stakeholders for sustainable investment project in Indonesia. INFF also could support us in promoting our IFRO and invite potential financial institution to collaborate with its future project owner. Quoting from the Untouched World Investment Report 2022, sustainable team investment in global financial market amount to $5 trillion in 2021. However, in the same year, 94% of sustainable fund went to the Europe and US. This demonstrates that developing economies are mostly absent for the sustainable fund market. Next slide, please. This is the last that before ending my response, I will also like to inform you that the Ministry of Investment is currently producing a Sustainable Investment Guidelines, or we call it SIG. The purpose of this guideline is to provide an instrument for business entities to measure the sustainability aspect of their business and even provide strategies to improve it. We work with remarkable NGO in sustainability. Here in Indonesia, we work with Indonesian Chamber and Commerce and Industry in producing it. We plan to launch the SIG at the B20 meeting in November, and we wish it would become a great milestone in mobilizing the private sector, mainly in achieving the 2030 national SDGs target. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ibu Rati, for that presentation. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're so glad to hear that the government already have been implementing some approaches to this INFF process. And so hopefully this will be the basic of how we approach the process in the future as well. So now we would like to hear more on how does the Financial Service Authority, or OJK, strengthen the integration of financial services, in particular related to sustainable finance. So now I'm going to invite Mr. Enrico Harjantoro from OJK to present your views on this matter.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Moderator, Ms. Valerina, all distinguished panelists, and also Ministry of National Development Planning, Bappenas. First, what I want to share in this event is that OJK, as an Indonesian FSA, is clearly committed to promoting sustainable finance as part of our support for achieving the objective of SDGs. Despite the vulnerabilities in the global economy due to the pandemic and, of course, the current geopolitical disruption, addressing climate change and alleviating poverty must be kept as priorities. So therefore, we need to ensure that the SDGs financing is aligned to a realistic and progressive time frame for the transition to take place. Deriving from the second phase of our Sustainable Finance Roadmap, 2021-2025, OJK rolls out several quick wins in sustainable financing. First is the Indonesia Green Taxonomy, which represents a comprehensive guide for the financial institution and issuers across industries for classifying green and non-green, or yellow and red, and sectors using nationally validated threshold. While the yellow and red criteria are not a negative list, OJK encourages financial institutions and business players to adopt the green taxonomy in their businesses for a greener economy. The implementation of this taxonomy is being carried out in phases, starting with several large banks as piloting banks to report their assessment based on this green taxonomy. Going forward, we will have a green taxonomy e-reporting system with larger scope beginning in the coming year. Second, we are also push the business matching or networking. So in this case, OJK facilitates focus group discussion and business pitches between industry players with their proposed green projects and potential financier in order to encourage greater financing and investments in these sectors. And thirdly, incentive and or disincentive policy mix. While OJK has released incentive for green bond issuance and also for the electric vehicles ecosystem, we believe that much more incentive and or disincentive are needed. If we talk about what can we get in the near future, what is the low-hanging fruit we've seen from these policies, the Indonesia Green Taxonomy provides granular and comprehensive data to capture the magnitude of financial institution green portfolios. It will provide a baseline for formulating incentive and or disincentive policies to promote the development of new green products and services. The data is fundamental for assessing the climate-related financial risk that is currently being developed globally. So therefore, Indonesia could be one of the few countries that are capable to integrate climate-related financial risk into the traditional financial risk assessment. From the perspective of the financial services industry, the standard is beneficial for the FIs themselves to distinguish the green and non-green criteria, thus providing more clarity in allocating their fund to sustainable economic sectors. And the business matching series of events enables the industry players to obtain the financing needed for the ongoing or future sustainable projects. OJK facilitates focus group discussion and business pitches between industry players with their proposed green projects and potential financiers in order to encourage greater financing and investment in these sectors. While we are not targeting an immediate deal between both parties, such events also aim to reduce any bottlenecking issues, if any, that impede the flow of capital or financing from financial institutions to business players, as well as develop innovative and viable financing schemes to unlock the potential of sustainable projects in Indonesia. My last comment regarding the INFF, we emphasize a lot of, while we know that INFF emphasize a lot of bringing public and private finance together, we believe that INFF with the effort to promote collaboration between public and private sectors for SDG financing. This must be supported by an adequate assessment on how much the cost of the National Development Plan and identify the financing needs. It further promotes the financing strategy as the center of the INFF approach. We are certainly aware of the capacity of financial institutions to support public funds. They shall take a significant role in financing the green economic transition. Of course, this must be executed with adequate risk mitigation and internalizing prudential principle. In Indonesia, the Planning Ministry of Bappenas has facilitated wide-ranging consultation and financing dialogues regarding SDG financing and the INFF approach. The financing dialogues brought together policymakers across the public sector, private sector representative, and civil society, structured around discussion on public sector financing, private sector financing, and international engagement with various subgroups within each thematic dialogue, just like this event. So furthermore, the blended finance scheme is instrumental to mobilize commercial finance, public and private sector sources towards sustainable development. The Ministry of Finance, of course, with PT SMI, has initiated the SDG Indonesia One platform as the pioneer in blended finance. Such schemes are also being extended to other sectors. We know the Global Blended Finance Alliance, introduced by Trita Karana and endorsed by Coordinating Ministry for Maritime and Investment Affairs, also enables a greater mobilization of private funds to scale the delivery of the 2030 SDGs agenda. With this respect, INFF is obviously aligned with some of the deliverables in OJK Sustainable Finance Roadmap Phase 2. As mentioned before, we further advancing the dialogue between financial industries and business players into a business matching format. The roadmap also promotes collaboration and coordination across ministries or national institutions to further accelerate sustainable financing, as well as develop innovative and feasible financing schemes. I stop there. Thank you, and back to you, Ms. Valentina.
Thank you. Thank you, Pak Enrico, for that presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, now I would like to hear more from Development Bank, or ADB. We have Bapak Said from ADB, who is joining us online as well. Pak Said, would you tell us more on ADB experience in catalyzing development finance to SDG-related projects, in particular those related to provision of basic services? And furthermore, we would also like to know your view on the role of DFI, because it's very important in INFF to help unlock private capital sources to SDGs. So how do you see, or the ADB see, in this matter, and how can INFF help to orchestrate this?
All right, thank you so much, Madam Moderator, distinguished fellow panelists, ladies and gentlemen. Apologies that I can only participate virtually. I'm unable to come and join you in person in Bali. So let me. I'll probably jump through some of the slides. Some of the slides are basically, provide some generic information that may not be responsive to the questions that you've asked. But so if, ADB as an institution, we support SDG. We have a corporate strategy. We call it Strategy 2030. That strategy states that ADB would like to be would like to achieve a prosperous, inclusive, resilient, sustainable Asia and the Pacific, while sustaining efforts to eradicate extreme poverty. Just that statement, that vision statement, encapsulates a lot of the sustainable development goals that that we have agreed at a global level. Now, our strategy 2030 comes with 7 operational priorities, and these 7 operational priorities are then mapped to the different SDGs. So our operational priorities, I'll just be very quick. Addressing remaining poverty and reducing inequalities. They obviously relate to SDG 1, 3, 4, 8, 10. Accelerating progress in gender equality, that's right there in SDG 5 and 8. OP3 is tackling climate change, building climate and disaster resilience, and enhancing environmental sustainability. There, it's talking about SDG 12, 13, 14, 15. And then OP4, making cities more livable. Again, that's basically very much in line with SDG 11. And then promoting rural development and food security, which is in line with SDG 2. The 6th operational priority is setting governance and institutional capacity, which is relevant for achieving SDG 16 and 17. Finally, fostering regional cooperation and integration, which is essentially what SDG 17 stipulates. Now, how do we basically try to do this. We do this through what we call as Finance Plus Plus. So it's finance, knowledge, and partnership. So finance means that ADB provides own financing, but we also try to mobilize funds from other sources. Hence, how do we catalyze financing, for SDG investment projects? So that is basically one of the ways, one of the key approaches, and one of the ways that we add value is through something of that sort. We also provide knowledge. So ADB focuses on practical value that fits local conditions, identify lessons from other countries, as well as replicate good practices. Lessons from our experiences in the country as well as beyond, and then replicate good practices from different experiences that we've had. And then partnerships. So ADB promotes dialogue and collaborations among diverse partners and stakeholders. So that is the way that we approach our mandate at a corporate level, at a regional level. Now, we have also at the country level what we call as country partnership strategy. For Indonesia, our country partnership strategy was approved in September 2020 and sort of runs until 2024. We have 3 different strategic pathways, which is improving well-being, accelerating economic recovery, strengthening resilience. And again, right, in terms of these strategic pathways, they're also mapped into the OPs, operational priorities that I mentioned earlier, and which in turn also is linked to SDG goals. So we have 3 priority areas. So we have 3 strategic pathways. We have a number of different priority areas, and basically for us, one of the things that makes ADB I think where ADB does add value is the fact that we are able to catalyze financing. We aim to every dollar that we put in, we're able to catalyze few more dollars to that. So that hence comes to the issue that you've raised, which is again, how does ADB catalyze financing? What sort of initiative that we have in this regard? So I've got a number of slides that sort of discusses this. First would be SDG Indonesia one, is the Green Financing Facility. So we, a lot of colleagues have mentioned about SDG. This is a platform, blended finance platform that is managed by PT SMI, Special Mission Vehicle of the government. Under that SDG Indonesia one platform, we come in under the Green Financing Facility. We basically look to catalyze green infrastructure investment using private, sovereign, and ADB financing. And by doing so, we support Indonesia's commitment to climate change and SDGs through innovative financing. Our initial support is around $150 million US, and we basically provide funding for clear green SDG and financial bankability projects. So here, when we say green, we're referring to projects that has climate mitigation and adaptation. And here we're looking again to leverage ADB and government funds to mobilize funding from private, institutional, and commercial sources over time. So that is one blended finance platform that we have locally to support SDG related projects. Another one that's worth mentioning, this is more at the regional level, is the ASEAN Catalytic Green Finance Facility. This is basically administered by ADB, and the aim is to accelerate green infrastructure development in ASEAN. Again, this is linked to Goal 9, which is industry, innovation, and infrastructure, and Goal 13 on climate action. And basically, this blended finance, this facility is looking to how to utilize better public funds to create bankable projects and catalyze private capital, technologies, and management efficiencies. So it is catalytic, it is green, and it is a facility. It's catalytic because it de-risks projects through lower cost of funds and mobilize commercial resources. Green because it promotes environmental sustainability by scaling up green infrastructure. It's a facility because we pull public development capital through this mechanism. We also as part of the ACGF, not just provide loan financing, but we also provide technical assistance to support the government and other stakeholders to identify, prepare, and finance commercially viable green infrastructure projects. So these are two financing platforms that we are supporting. But in addition to that, we also try to unlock private capital to finance SDGs through other means. We provided technical assistance to the ASEAN Capital Market Forum. I understand that in 2023, OJK will assume the chairmanship of that forum. And we we supported the publication of the ASEAN SDG bonds toolkit. So the objective of the toolkit is to basically provide guidance on key principles and processes that issuers can adhere to when issuing an SDG bonds. And then it targets national development finance institutions and policy banks in ASEAN. It can become a key instrument of government development policy. So government can greatly benefit, obviously, from more access to private capital through the issuance of SDG bonds. So this toolkit we hope we will be able to serve that purpose. So another way that we unlock, so that is a specific output, let's say, deliverable that we have contributed to in terms of unlocking private capital to finance SDGs. At a broader level, we are providing support to the ASEAN Capital Market Forum, ACMF, to promote interconnected, inclusive, and resilient ASEAN capital market. We've supported the development and promotion of the ASEAN Green Social and Sustainable Bond Standards that has resulted in around $22.5 billion of issuance regionally. And then also we're providing support to the ASEAN +3 Bond Market Initiative, ABMI, to create ecosystem, basically, for bond market development in ASEAN +3. So, in addition to providing blended finance platform, providing technical assistance, we also have budget support program. This is basically budget support. We have the Human Capital Development Program. So this is a budget support financing that we provide to the government, Indonesia government, implement reforms in education, skills development, health, and social protection. The program has supported the government to develop SDG roadmap and financing plan for SDGs implementation, and link fiscal transfers with SDG indicators such as reduction of stunting. We also have the Disaster Resilient Improvement Program that also looks into basically supporting SDG. Now, on the question of the key challenges that we find, sometimes in terms of catalyzing investment financing for SDG projects, sometimes we find that one of the issues would be capacity, and I guess in summary, it would be capacity, project readiness, and enabling environment. But how do we overcome that? We overcome that in terms of capacity. We obviously provide technical assistance. We provide training, to PTSMI, to other stakeholders. What is also important to mention here is that we also provide industry awareness, right? There is sometimes a need to raise awareness among industry to tap on the capital market for SDG financing. There is a lack of awareness on available instrument to do this. So we are helping to address this through technical assistance, which among others have resulted in webinars with industry, survey with the industry to understand the challenges faced and in developing green bond issuance, including developing green bond issuance. And then enabling environment, we continue to engage in policy dialogue with the government on this. We also try to support regulatory reform. For example, we've reviewed green bond regulations to align them with international best practice and so forth. Now, in terms of the integrated national financing framework, from ADB side, I think we are supporting this at the regional level, and I think if I applaud Indonesian government in their effort to create such framework at the national level, and I think from our side, from ADB side, we'll be happy to also provide whatever support we have, share experiences our experiences in terms of managing blended financing platform, let's say, to support SDG projects. So let me end with that. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Said, for explaining to us about the role of ADB in advancing SDGs agenda in Indonesia especially. So thank you once again. Ladies and gentlemen, now we are going to go to Ms. Nomindari Ektur, CEO of Mongolian Sustainable Finance Association. Ms. Nomindari, how do you see private sector engagement in advancing a more holistic approach to financing for sustainable development? So, and how do you see INFF role in strengthening together private sector engagement?
Thank you very much, Valerina, for the question. And first of all, I also would like to thank UNDP and the organizers today for inviting Mongolia to this very important discussion. I think it's very critical that we have also non-G20 and smaller economies in the room, so we can really ensure that we tackle climate change and sustainability issues in a more harmonized and coherent way. And going back to the question, I think we all know that we are not close to achieving our climate commitments, and extensive additional resources need to be mobilized. This means that the private sector should not be just engaged, but really be in the key driving seat to make this transition happen. And the reason for this is not because sustainable development is something good or nice or it's a social responsibility to do, but it's simply because it makes much better business sense. And we have been seeing this a lot from the private sector recently. It's better from a regulatory perspective, from a market perspective, and also technology perspective. And we also know that another good news is that the private sector can actually do this transition and have significant resource potential. While on the other hand, we have also seen that from several studies that in order to reach the SDGs, the financing that is required comes to around 1% of global financial assets. So recognizing both this gap that we have, but also the opportunity, the Mongolian financial sector came together in 2013 and have started the Mongolian Sustainable Finance Initiative, which is basically a voluntary project that aims to set market standards on integrating sustainability into financial decision making. And as we've been working on this agenda for almost 10 years now, our experience has really shown that the financial sector has a critical role to play. And their transition into sustainability really enables also a broader transition in the private sector. Many private companies especially SMEs or those companies that have limited exposure to international investors and partners, were introduced to ESG and sustainability concepts through reporting requirements. And now we are seeing that these companies are actually coming back to organizations like us, asking for support, tools, and capacity to comply with these banks' requirements and be able to access more green finance. And building on this good experience in the banking sector, we are now broadening our reach in Mongolia to non-banking, non-financial sectors, including capital markets, microfinance institutions, insurance companies, and so on. And one of the main reasons that we really think that the approach in Mongolia is very interesting and unique and something that can be also replicated in similar markets is because first, we were able to mobilize the entire financial sector collectively. So not even leaving any single bank or financial institution behind, big or small. And this really helped to create a more systemic change and a level playing field at a larger scale, which we really now need in order to reach our sustainable development commitments. And secondly, although sustainable finance in Mongolia started with more private sector action, policymakers have been very closely engaged, really from the top at the president level to the central bank governor level, and we're able to create a very collaborative platform and environment where the private sector can openly discuss, advise and advocate for policies and incentives by the government. So there is a very unique partnership model between the public and the private sector in Mongolia. However, even though progress has been happening, there are of course several other bottlenecks that we still need to address. And I think one thing that we really need to be discussing in events like this today is to think about standardization, the importance of standardization. And there's this huge wave of taxonomies, impact standards now emerging in both developed and developing markets. But I think also larger efforts need to happen in the harmonization of these taxonomies. And I believe UNDP, G20, EU, and these organizations really have a critical role to play in this area, because if we really have good and clear and aligned standards together with sound verification and certification mechanisms, the cost of sustainable investment can really come down significantly, and the private sector will be more encouraged to invest in sustainable projects. Secondly, providing policy incentives. OJK, Indonesia is a really good example. China is also another country that we aspire to a lot. Is very important, especially when the market is not yet that mature. For example, in Mongolia, the central bank provides discounts for green swap or currency exchange agreements to encourage local banks to access more international climate finance. And in addition, the Ministry of the Environment also provides subsidized green loan interest rate schemes to help reduce the cost of microgreen loans from a market interest rate of 14% to 3%, which is really targeted at low-income households. And of course, also mandatory compliance requirements can work sometimes. In Mongolia, we have seen that a requirement for banks and non-bank financial institutions to report the green loan statistics in line with the Mongolia Green Taxonomy has been a great boost for the market. And similarly, we are now also seeing that reporting requirements are also emerging in the capital market. And last not but least, I just wanted to mention that, of course, capacity development is still needed at all levels, frontline to management, but this really needs to happen in a more systematic way on more technical topics like portfolio emissions accounting, science-based target setting, climate risk, pipeline development, and so on. And I just wanted to stress really the importance and the support from donors and development partners like UNDP on this, and the need to continue the collaboration on this. And going to the second question on the INFF, and apologies about the slides, I didn't have comprehensive slides, only 2 slides that I wanted to share to show what the INFF in Mongolia encompasses. So if we look back, we really started the journey in Mongolia 9 years ago, when there was very limited understanding of general sustainability and sustainable finance. But now really the entire financial sector has adopted sustainable finance principles. All banks have sustainability management systems in place. We have a green taxonomy. We have started tracking green financing flows. We know what percentage of our green loans, are actually green. We have successfully piloted also new financial products like sustainable cashmere finance. And now we are in the process of setting up a national green bank or an on-lending facility as a joint effort between the government, the private sector, and the Green Climate Fund. And in the capital market, green bond and ESG reporting regulations and practices are also emerging, and they're much more planned. And I just wanted to highlight that in all of this, the INFF played a very important role. As I mentioned before, Mongolia's progress so far is part due to a very unique partnership model between public sector, private sector, development partners, and also civil society. And through the INFF, we were able to bring all these partners together to one table, formalize this collaboration platform, which is very important, and get much stronger buy-in from higher level government officials. And very importantly, really link the development policies with the financing strategy, really bringing a bridge between policy and financing, which we know have been missing in many cases where we have really grand sustainability and climate change targets, but the sound financing strategies have been really missing for a long time. And also with the INFF, we were able to identify our gaps. For example, we saw that in Mongolia, there was also a need to increase private financing, not only for green sectors, but also for social impact sectors like education and health, especially in this post-COVID era now. And recognizing this, now we're working with UNDP on developing an SDG financing taxonomy, which also offers some uniform impact indicators. And we're hoping that this taxonomy will be approved by the end of the year. So Mongolia will be also one of the first countries that will introduce not only a green taxonomy, but also a sustainable taxonomy that looks at the social aspects as well. And also through the INFF now we have a long-term financing strategy that really sets out clear actions, targets, and roles and responsibilities for all our stakeholders. So in other words, we have a common sustainable finance vision as a country now. We know what we need to do to reach that vision. So if you look to the slides here, this is a very quick snapshot of what the INFF encompasses, both on the public sector reforms, but also in the private sector reforms. And if we go to the next slide, you can also see that we have a very specific goal and target as part of the INFF to at least increase green lending in the banking sector to 10% and in the non-banking sector to 5%, which of course does not sound a lot, but currently it is actually at 1 to 2%. So with this quantitative targets, really everyone in the financial sector and also in the policy space is working towards the same goal. So I'll stop here and happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nomindari Erto, for your presentation. Now I'm turning on to Pak Tantowi, who's already sitting here with me for this second session. Pak Tantowi, as you represent the philanthropy angle, we would like to hear more on what are the exciting initiatives that the philanthropy community bring into the table to support the SDGs, of course, and how do you see the role of philanthropy community in catalyzing social finance to reach out to the most vulnerable populations?
Thank you, Val. It's nice to be with you today, especially if Val and myself are coming from the same industry. We are from television industry. Well, I'm so proud, but not too happy to be alone here on the stage. I hope that all of our friends are still okay to join the rest of the session. I mean, they're not hungry enough. Thank you. I speak here on behalf of the philanthropists, as you request. Before answering your questions, I would like to share with you some important facts. The first one is that through United in Diversity Foundations, of which I'm the president, and the Haka Forums, we have been working very hard to socialize and to promote the blended finance. As you understand that the awareness of the Indonesian people at large towards the blended finance and the global blended finance is still relatively low. And it makes the situation is not easy as you think when you need support from the people, from the government officials, and also from the parliament members. I say that because I was in the parliament for 2 terms for almost 10 years, Paul. So I did have some easy talks with them, you know, asking them about the blended finance being one of the most important vehicle to close the gap of reaching the SDGs before 2030. So we use all the channels that we have to socialize and to make the blended finance known among the public. As our friend Paul Horrock from OECD explains just now, and I guess his presentation and explanations over blended finance was very clear. I copy a lot from what you said. So blended finance is actually the use of public and philanthropic fundings in order to mobilize private funding, which is used to close the gap of SDGs of so many countries before 2030. As the previous speakers shared with us, that most of the countries in the world, including the G20 countries, are facing the same problem. It's a global challenge, not problem, but challenge. It's a global challenge. The challenge is that most of them I'm not saying most, probably some of them, you know the figure very well, are in a position of not reaching their commitments towards SDGs by 2030. And we all understand that the main problem behind not being able to reach that has always been the budget, the money. If they rely on the state budget from their respective governments, it will never work. So that is a problem, especially the big chunk of money of so many countries in the world have been used up for COVID response. So all of the countries in the world are in the positions not to be able to support the SDGs commitments. So that is the problem. And we thank all the experts, including OECD and also SDG-1 in Indonesia, for their creativity and their thought of finding new mechanisms to close the gaps. The new mechanism called blended finance. So the blended finance is the great solutions for all countries in the world, especially those that have difficulty in reaching their commitment. As I said earlier, and also said by our esteemed speakers just now, public and philanthropic fundings is never enough public and philanthropic fundings are never enough, to reach the purpose, for which we need the combinations of public and philanthropists in order to mobilize the private fundings. And the fundings that we get is badly needed to fund SDG-linked projects, right? So we need the massive amount of pension funds and also the sovereign wealth funds, which are categorized as the private fundings, to be placed in the development sectors. And that is the challenge. Now, Paul also indirectly says to us that getting the money from the private sector is never easy for many reasons. So one of which is that the SDG-linked projects or climate actions over the years have never been interesting and attractive projects. So it needs a big efforts from all of us, to convince the world, to convince those that have the private funds to put their investments to the SDG links or SDG-related projects. We have to educate the world, especially the financiers and the investors, on investing with impact. Everybody now is not every investor is only interested with investments with interesting financial returns. But some of them are also very interested in being involved in investment with impact. What impact? Social impacts and environment impact. I did try to socialize that well, using that approach, and the changes happen. I mean, they start talking and they start asking and they start contacting us for follow-up. So, answering your questions on what role that can be played by the philanthropists and what role that have been demonstrated by the philanthropists, well, I can easily share with you here on the some initiatives played by the philanthropists like Rockefeller, like Ford, Gates, Packard, in collaborating to unlock the funding from the private sectors to be used for SDG programs. So here on my back, you see what THK Forum is doing, like I said earlier. So, ladies and gentlemen, THK Forum or Trihita Karana Forum is a forum. is a place where philanthropists, private funders, grantors, the rich people in the world that have kind-hearted, they sit together, they convince together in order to come up with several initiatives that link the world, not only G20 countries, in order to reach their SDGs commitment. The 70 objectives of SDGs are countries' commitment to the world. So no matter what, they have to achieve that. They have to feel that, and they have to make them happen. And like I said earlier, the problems that they have right now, especially after COVID, is the funding support from the government. Now, as you see, can we go back to the previous page, please? As we see there, we have global blended finance 6 priority function areas. So we are dealing with the commercial sectors, and also we are dealing with the capacity building. We all understand to make that happen, we need the support from the commercial sectors, as everybody understands. But also, to make the system work, we need policies, okay? We need policies from each government. So I think one of the key success of the Nigeria in doing the global blended finance is the support from the government. So the government come up with the needed policies, and I think that is what we have to copy from Nigeria. And after policies, then we have to level up the capability and the quality of the human. So this is what we call human capacity development, without which it's not going to be easy for us, you know, to run this new concept. And the last one is the we need the support from technology, especially the digital. The words right now and in the future will be based on the digitalizations. So there is no way, I should say, we can run the business in the future easily, efficiency, with a great result, without the help or without the support of digitalizations. Now, THK Forum, in cooperations with United and University, are doing quite a number of projects in order to achieve those targets. So we are working very hard to approach the private sectors, and then the fundings, the grants, or even the pledges that we get from them will be aligned to the SDGs link or related projects that belong to the G20 countries beyond. So the THK Forum is a forum, but you know, to make all the principles of blended finance work, we need an operator, we need a vehicle, okay, we need a driver. And that's why we have been talking about Global Blended Finance Alliance. So Global Blended Finance Alliance is nothing than operator. It's a tool to operationalize the principle of the global blended, of the global blended finance or blended finance. And can I have 1 minute? Yes. So the Global Blended Finance Alliance, ladies and gentlemen, is not a financial institution. It's not a bank. We are not playing with funding that people contribute. We are only a liner. We align this pool of investors, you know, the blending of public, private, and philanthropists to the countries, G20 countries beyond that have projects that cannot happen because of the lack of the budget. So the Global Blended Alliance is nothing else than a liner. Our job is to align these two poles. And the Global Blended Finance Alliance is an initiative of Indonesia, which is fully endorsed by the government of Indonesia. So it will be founded, it will be established by countries, but we open door very widely to all the private sectors that will become the partners of the alliance. I stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pak Tantoy. Yes, give applause to our last speaker of the day. Ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, there will be no Q&A session for the second panel discussion due to time restriction. However, if you have any questions for our speakers, the committee would be pleased to give your questions directly to the speakers later on. For now, I would like to sum up the panel discussions for the second panel discussions. So from this session, we know that there are hopeful feedbacks from our speakers, especially regarding Indonesia as the G20 president. Indonesia has been demonstrating their commitment in advocating for holistic financing strategy. As also mentioned before, the defining phase of INFF is on its implementation, and therefore strengthening multi-stakeholders engagement will be critical to the birth of INFF, and that can deliver resources to achieve the SDGs finally. So with that, I conclude this second panel discussions. I am Valerina Daniel, as your moderator, would like to thank you for your participations, to our speakers, to our audience who are joining us live here and also online. So please give a big applause to all of us. And finally, wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Om Santi 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 Om. Now I hand over the time to our MC.
All right, thank you once again, ladies and gentlemen. Please give a big round of applause for our moderator and distinguished speakers who are joining us on site here or joining us virtually online. Thank you very much for all speakers and moderator once again. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it has been a productive morning until afternoon with a fruitful discussion. And by the end of the second session of panel discussion, we have come to the end of the international side event today. And on behalf of the host and organizing committee, we extend our appreciation for your tremendous support and thank you for your active participation during this meeting. We do hope the discussion could contribute our common goal toward inclusive growth, especially by accelerating the achievement of financial inclusion by INFF Sustainable Investment and improve social benefits recipients through the use of digital and innovative approaches. Lastly, ladies and gentlemen, with all due respect, gently we would like to please you proceed into the foyer area to enjoy the exhibition. And if any lunch session as arranged and informed based on your personal schedule, as we will immediately prepare this room for the next seminar agenda, which is V20 seminar. As we already informed previously, for those of you who are interested in joining the next seminar agenda, you are cordially invited to re-enter this room at 1:30 p.m. in Bali time. Thank you very much for your kind attention and appreciation. It is an honor and privilege for me to be here. I'm Putri Cahaya. Thank you very much once again and have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Tanah airku tidak melupakan. We